LoveLore Library. Chapter 174. Xinyu wasn't joking. Other than the morning court, the two of them spent almost all their time together. Shang Junlin knew this, but when he saw Xinyu's innocent look, he felt more and more that this matter had something to do with him. Xinyu had never concealed his disgust for the King of Yu. Shang Junlin had discovered this a long time ago. He had suspected that there was some relationship between them that he did not know of. Later on, when he thought about it, with Xinyu's personality, what the King of Yu had done previously was enough to make him feel disgusted. No matter who did this, I have to thank him properly. Maybe King Yu's actions angered the public. So many people took the initiative to attack him. In my opinion, King Yu is really strange. Those things were indeed done by him. Since he did it, why didn't he have the guts to admit it? Xinyu couldn't stand such sanctimonious people the most. Some people are just like that. When I was in the palace, he brought other princes to bully me. After bullying me, he criticized me with a high and mighty attitude, saying that it was because I did something wrong that caused these people to bully me. Whatever he did, he liked to remove himself completely. If it wasn't for the sudden incident, even if it was a rebellion, he would definitely pretend that he was upholding justice. Shang Junlin had known King Yu for a long time, so he knew some of King Yu's thoughts like the back of his hand. Xinyu wasn't surprised, because it was indeed like this in his previous life. All the bad reputation was pushed to Shang Junlin, and King Yu himself was clean. Your Majesty is right. I'm afraid this matter will make him suffer for a long time. Their guess was right. King Yu was unconscious for an entire day before he woke up. Mr. Tan stayed by his bedside with a gloomy face. What the hell is going on? Why did he suddenly faint? Thinking of what happened before he fainted, King Yu's chest hurt, and he closed his eyes in pain. Mr. Tan obviously knew something. After King Yu fainted, he asked people to interrogate the people who came into contact with King Yu. The results made him feel incredulous. King Yu fainted because of those rumors. Mr. Tan really couldn't understand. He tried to find other possibilities. After a round of investigation, he finally proved that the result was the one he didn't want to believe the most. The doctor said that you were too angry. What could have made you so angry? Mr. Tan tried to make a final struggle. After a moment of silence, King Yu slowly sat up with the help of his servants. His complexion was very bad, and his eyes were filled with complicated emotions. Has Mr. Tan heard the rumors about this prince? His words confirmed all their guesses. Mr. Tan stood up in disbelief. So you fainted because of a few words. Does Mr. Tan feel that these words are neither painful nor itchy? King Yu clenched his fists. Has Mr. Tan already heard about it? Aren't the rumors outside even worse than this? It's just some useless people venting their dissatisfaction. Why do you take it so seriously? Mr. Tan didn't know how to describe his feelings at this moment, but considering that he still needed the Prince of Yu's help in the future, he began to comfort him with mixed feelings. Is there no way to stop it? King Yu lowered his head, so his expression couldn't be seen. I have already ordered them not to speak about it in Hanzhou City. We can't do anything about other places for the time being. You don't have to worry about it. Once it's done, no one will dare to speak about it. I understand. King Yu rested for a few days before his body recovered. Mr. Tan had ordered that no one was allowed to talk about this matter in front of King Yu. At any time, words couldn't be stopped. The more they were forbidden from speaking about it, the faster it would spread in private. Initially, only a few people knew about it, but after it was forbidden, it became something that everyone in Hanzhou City knew about. As a result, the dissatisfaction of the people towards King Yu grew. The Northern Desert Emperor received the document from De Huan. After reading it, the Northern Desert Emperor flew into a rage the entire night and summoned all his ministers for a discussion. What do you think he means by this? The Northern Desert Emperor slammed his hand on the table, causing the table to tremble. The ministers looked at each other, not knowing what was going on. Take a look for yourselves. Trying his best to suppress his anger, the Northern Desert Emperor ordered his servants to read the document from De Juan. Following the servant's voice, the expressions on the ministers' faces slowly changed. Embarrassment, anger, all kinds of emotions intertwined, creating a brilliant scene. De Juan's emperor is too much. An old minister's face turned red. He wants us to give out all the resources we've accumulated. Perhaps it was a coincidence, but what De Juan asked the Northern Desert to hand over was the limit of what they could take out. De Juan's appetite isn't small. He should see if he can swallow it all. Aside from the resources, there's also the grassland. Lin Yuan is one of the most fertile lands in the Northern Desert. Why should he take it just because he wants it? The hall was instantly filled with an uproar. The Northern Desert Emperor rubbed his forehead tiredly and scolded, "Shut up. Do you think De Juan can hear you? If you have time to talk about this, why don't you think about how we should deal with it this time? Why is De Juan suddenly asking for compensation? Haven't they always been proud of their status and didn't care about this? If that wasn't the case, they wouldn't have just handed over a letter of surrender. Who knows why? The current emperor of the Great Huan Kingdom has a bad opinion of the Northern Desert. Not long after he ascended the throne, he ignored the previous emperor's orders and attacked us. Now that he's firmly on the throne, these things are most likely his request. Are we supposed to hand over the things obediently? From the emperor to the ministers and commoners, no one was willing to hand over these things willingly. The Northern Desert was different from the Great Huan dynasty. The Great Huan dynasty was rich in land and resources. The Northern Desert was a nomadic tribe that relied on the sky for food. They often invaded the Great Huan dynasty for the land. Knowing that the Northern Desert people wouldn't hand over these things willingly, the Northern Army had been keeping an eye on them and pressuring them. They had fought for so long and couldn't fight for nothing. Part of the compensation from the Northern Desert would be kept in the Northern Army. Shang Junlin expected the Northern Desert people's unwillingness to cooperate. What does your majesty plan to do? Shen Yu picked up the document from the Northern Desert and skimmed through it. Now you know how to cry. Why didn't you do it earlier? The Northern Desert Emperor didn't know where he got the inspiration. This time he cried and said that the Northern Desert was also affected by the drought in the Northern Desert. They sent their troops south because they couldn't live anymore and wanted to find a way out for their people. Shen Yu only found it funny. They knew that De Juan wasn't easy to deal with and wanted to play the emotional card. Unfortunately, their wishful thinking was wrong. Shang Junlin wasn't the kind of person who would be soft-hearted when he shouldn't be. If you can't do it, then wait for the Northern Army to come knocking on your door. Shang Junlin's voice was cold. Finding a way out for your people is not a reason to invade De Juan. If you really care about your people, you can let them become De Juan's people. That way, De Juan's imperial court will protect them from hunger. Don't you think so, Your Majesty? Shen Yu narrowed his eyes. You is right. Since they aren't De Juan's people, why should De Juan empathize with them? The imperial court's meaning was clear. The Northern Army was happy to see the imperial court's attitude. They didn't like the Northern Desert for a long time. If they let them go easily this time, they wouldn't be happy. After receiving the imperial court's instructions, the Northern Army was ready to go. It's best if the Northern Desert doesn't know what's good for them. We'll destroy their nest. The people of the Northern Desert are really shameless. They were the ones who wanted to fight the war, but they don't want to admit their loss. They even cried so miserably. When they bullied our Great Huan Kingdom, they didn't show any sympathy. This time, we should be more understanding of them. Why didn't they empathize with us before? That's right. Keep a close eye on them. Don't let the northern desert people do anything. Yes. The person negotiating with the northern desert people was still Fong Jai. The northern desert people were already afraid of this woman. When they saw her, they subconsciously weakened. Forgive De Huan for not being able to accept your request. Fong Jai sat down calmly. Her voice was neither servile nor overbearing. People have to pay for their actions. You northern desert people attacked first. Now that you've lost, you naturally have to follow De Huan's rules. Throughout the whole process, the topic was led by Fong Jai. Fong Jai spoke clearly and her words were reasonable. Every word she said was flawless. On the contrary, she could accurately find flaws in the other party's words and use the other party's reasons to make them speechless. The northern desert officials who came to negotiate looked pale. Now, everyone in the northern desert officials knew that they shouldn't have any dealings with the female official. If they couldn't avoid it, they should obediently admit defeat. They should be mentally prepared early so that they wouldn't collapse after the negotiation. If Fong Jai took action, there would only be one result. No matter how unwilling the northern desert people were, they could only do as De Huan said under the watchful eyes of the northern army. They want to extend the deadline for a few more days. A few days later, the latest progress was sent to the palace. After reading it, Shang Junlin said, "They said that they can't gather so many things in a short period of time. When spring comes, they will send the compensation to De Huan." The northern desert resigned themselves to their fate so quickly. Xin Yu was surprised. They also made a presumptuous request. Speaking of this matter, Shang Junlin was a little amused. They hope that the imperial court will quickly summon Fong Jai back to the capital to work and not stay in the northern desert. It seems that Fong Gunyang contributed a lot to the northern desert's quick resignation. Xin Yu had heard of Fong Jai's battle prowess. In the northern desert officialdom, Fong Jai had become an existence that made people pale. Shang Junlin, I have to say, with her around, it saved me a lot of effort. Xin Yu, Your Majesty must reward her for her meritorious service. Shang Junlin, of course. Yu said, when have I not been fair in my rewards and punishments? Xin Yu, in my heart, Your Majesty is of course the best monarch. The matter of the northern desert temporarily came to an end. They said that they couldn't come up with so much compensation in a short period of time. De Huan also couldn't force them to pay. However, the materials could be slowly gathered, but it was better to get some ready-made things first. For example, the grassland that Shang Junlin had been thinking about for a long time. Specially for giving them time is Your Majesty's kindness to them. For a ready-made existence like a grassland, they can't say that they need to be forgiving, right? Xin Yu's white and slender fingers slowly moved across the list of names and stopped at a certain place. Shang Junlin covered his hand. Yu is right. Didn't they say that the people were trapped in hunger? When I take over, I will solve these problems for them. Chapter 175. This list of compensation wasn't randomly made. It was made by the Ministry of Revenue based on the losses the Northern Desert had brought to the Great Huan Kingdom and the specific situation of the Northern Desert. It happened to be in the middle of a line that would make the people of the Northern Desert feel pain but not unbearable. As for the Northern Desert saying that they needed time to prepare, Xin Yu and Shang Junlin both knew that this was just an excuse. They didn't mean to force them into a corner and just pretended not to know. When the news reached the Northern Desert Emperor almost couldn't breathe. How could De Huan have the nerve to say that seizing their land was for their own good? The Northern Desert Emperor clutched his chest and felt his vision darken. Your Majesty! A servant hurried to support him. Your Majesty, are you all right? Someone come quickly. Call the imperial physician. Leaning on the servant's shoulder, the Northern Desert Emperor gritted his teeth and said, "Call the ministers to discuss this." "But, Your Majesty, your body, just do it. I'll be fine after a while. Go quickly." The servant didn't dare to delay and hurriedly went outside the palace to call for people. The ministers were brought to the palace in confusion. Before they had time to wonder what happened, they were shocked by the sudden news. De Huan wanted them to hand over the pasture immediately. De Huan's meaning was very clear. The other compensation could be delayed for a while, but the pasture and horses must be given to De Huan immediately. Didn't they say that the people were so hungry that they couldn't eat before attacking Su Bei? De Huan's move can also relieve some of the pressure on you. In the document, it was full of De Huan is also for the good of the Northern Desert. Don't be ungrateful. No wonder the Northern Desert Emperor almost vomited blood after reading it. De Huan is simply going too far. Some of the ministers were furious. Do we really have to give up that land? There were also ministers who were panicking. There were also people who were dissatisfied with the Northern Desert Emperor because of this. If he hadn't strongly advocated attacking De Huan, would today's disaster have occurred? Your Majesty, what do you think of the matter I mentioned before? At this time, a newly promoted minister stood up. What? The Northern Desert Emperor was confused. I think it's feasible to cooperate with De Huan's King Yu. Cooperate with De Huan. At this time, we can't even take care of ourselves, yet we still have to help that King Yu fight the Great Huan Emperor. This matter had been brought up in the imperial court before. Many ministers were watching from the sidelines. This time, they were scared of the Northern Army and did not dare to go against them. Originally, the Northern Desert Emperor had been persuaded, but later, several ministers disagreed. After some persuasion, the Northern Desert Emperor gave up the idea. There were still many ministers who disagreed with the idea of bringing up the past. Seeing that they were about to quarrel again, the Northern Desert Emperor quickly said, all right, let's talk about this later. Now, let's talk about the compensation. In a few days, someone will come to take over Lin Yuan. Are we really going to give it out directly? The hall quieted down. The ministers looked at each other, but no one said anything. With De Huan saying things to this extent, it was clear that there was no room for negotiation. Which official is negotiating with us this time? Can we give them a few more days? What's the use of extending the deadline? At that time, won't we still have to hand Lin Yuan over? Drag it out. Maybe there will be a turn for the better. This was the Northern Desert's intention from the beginning. It was best to drag it out long enough for De Huan to completely forget about this matter. Then do you know which official De Huan's emperor gave the negotiation to this time? As long as it's not Master Fong from the Northern Desert, it doesn't matter who it is. Unfortunately, things did not go as planned. After 2 days, De Huan sent a message from the negotiator. Who is it? In the imperial court, the Northern Desert Emperor asked the messenger. Replying to Your Majesty, it's Master Fong from the Northern Desert. De Huan's emperor said that she often interacts with the Northern Desert and they are familiar with each other. The Northern Desert Emperor closed his eyes. This was great. Not to mention that there was no room for negotiation, it was already good enough that they didn't give out more land. De Huan was really good. For a moment, the atmosphere in the imperial court was extremely cold. Zhu Wang, who had previously been placed in the palace to be served with good food and drink, had been locked up in a secret prison by Shang Junlin after a failed attempt to escape. Regardless of whether there was really something wrong with him or not, since he had already been caught, there was no reason to let him go in vain. In addition, this person seemed to know a bit about Shin Yu's background, so it was even more impossible for Shang Junlin to let him go. Feng Pingqi was beheaded after autumn, and the Feng family was implicated. All the participants were executed. Since then, the Feng family completely disappeared from the capital. As for the person who was caught with them, after confirming that he couldn't get anything out of him, Shang Junlin directly executed him. Because he tried to make a move on Xinyu, Shang Junlin chose a less pleasant way for him to die. Xinyu knew about this after everything had happened. On the day of the Feng family's punishment, many people went to watch the execution. This servant heard from the palace maid that the people of the capital were very satisfied. Xinyu picked up a leaf from Junling and looked it up and down. Everyone knows what he did. The bad official got the punishment he deserved. Naturally, they would feel satisfied. Tell Boss Yi that he can collect more articles about the punishment of corrupt officials. This servant understands. Mu Shi admired her young master more and more. It seemed that he didn't do anything, but he could see through everyone's heart. He could guess their behavior without any mistake. Come and take a look at this flower. Is it a little wilted? Xinyu looked at the Junling in his hand and frowned slightly. Since it was in his hands, the Junling had been in good condition. Recently, he didn't know what happened, but it suddenly became wilted. Xinyu found a palace maid who was good at flowers and plants in the palace to take a look, but she couldn't find anything. Mu Shi looked down and hesitated. Is it because it's afraid of the cold? There was a heavy snowfall recently, and the temperature suddenly dropped a lot. Move it to my palace first and let it rest for 2 days. If it still hasn't recovered, ask Imperial Physician Gu when he comes to take its pulse. Xinyu walked around the greenhouse. Because Shang Junlin would send Xinyu some flowers and plants from time to time, the size of the greenhouse was now more than twice as big as before. There were all kinds of flowers in the greenhouse. Some of them were worth thousands of gold, and some of them could be raised by ordinary people. Xinyu treated them all equally. He arranged them according to their habits, and every one of them grew well. Mu Shi held the flowers and followed Xinyu back to the palace. Xinyu put the Junling in its original place, washed his hands, and went to the small study. In this palace, there were more and more traces that belonged to him. When Shang Junlin came back, the first thing he saw was a pot of flowers in the bedroom. The palace maid hurried to explain. Guijun said that the flowers are a little wilted, so he put them here for 2 days to see the situation. Shang Junlin nodded. Where is Guijun? Replying to your majesty, Guijun is in the small study. Shang Junlin did not stay and went straight to the small study. Xinyu was looking at the map of the Great Huan dynasty. Shang Junlin often signed memorials here, and the map was also left by him. What's you doing? Your Majesty is back. Xinyu looked up. He's looking at the terrain around Hangzhou City. Xinyu was a little concerned about the King of Yu in Hangzhou City. He guessed that the King of Yu was waiting for someone. After all, with the King of Yu's current military strength, it was basically impossible for him to succeed. The King of Yu would not throw his life away, and neither would the people behind him. Your Majesty, look over here. The mountain range stretches. If the King of Yu has a backup plan, he will most likely enter Hangzhou City from here. Xinyu pointed to the west of Hangzhou City. Aside from the army surrounding Hangzhou City, I have also sent people to hide in the dark. The place that you mentioned has steep terrain, and it's easy to defend. If those people are really hiding in the mountains, it will be difficult to fight. How many people does the King of Yu have now? Around 100,000. These were all forces that entered Hangzhou City before the imperial court could react. After the imperial court sent people over, the forces that appeared one after another seemed to have disappeared, never to appear again. The King of Yu was waiting, and so was Shang Junlin. How many things did the previous emperor leave behind for the King of Yu? Xinyu couldn't understand. No matter what, Shang Junlin was the king of Yu's biological son, and he was even the son of the previous empress. After the previous empress died, the previous emperor did not appoint another empress. So it was impossible for him to not have any feelings for Shang Junlin. Shin Yu couldn't feel it deeply before coming into contact with Shang Junlin. But the more he knew about Shang Junlin's past, the more Shin Yu felt the strangeness. For example, the previous emperor's hostility and malice towards Shang Junlin. The previous emperor left a mess for his son, who could ascend the throne, but left the best things for his other son. I'm not sure. The previous emperor didn't do things properly. I originally thought that he doted on the sixth prince the most. But after the sixth prince died, he acted as if nothing had happened and continued to seek pleasure. Even when the sixth prince's birth mother came to plead for mercy, he kicked her away. Who would have thought that the sixth prince's bloodline, who was in the limelight, would fall so quickly? Shang Junlin went behind Shin Yu and placed his arms beside Shin Yu. His masculine aura enveloped Shin Yu, and Shin Yu raised his head to look at him. Shang Junlin's lips curled up, and his tone was filled with sarcasm. He didn't have a good impression of the previous emperor. Shin Yu's lips moved, but the words that came out of his mouth were, "Does your majesty want to sit?" After that, he moved to the side to make room for Shang Junlin. Shang Junlin sat down and took Shin Yu into his arms. "Do you want to sit on my lap?" Without waiting for Shin Yu's response, Shang Junlin had already put him on his lap. The man's body temperature could be felt through his clothes. Shin Yu was used to being hugged by him, so he automatically found a comfortable position to sit. I didn't stay in the capital for a long time, and I didn't spend much time with the previous emperor. The people who were in contact with the previous emperor were either killed by the other princes or by me. There were very few people left, and I couldn't get any information from them. I suspect that even the king of Yu himself didn't know what the previous emperor left for him.
Shang Junlin picked up a strand of Shin Yu's hair and played with it in his hand. The previous emperor had always been on guard against the princes. The princes grew stronger, but the emperor grew older. When they were young, there might still be some familial affection. When the princes grew up, how many trials could this thin familial affection withstand? Will your majesty be like this in the future? Shin Yu knew that he shouldn't ask this question, but at this moment, he wanted to ask, so he asked. I won't have my own children. How can I be like the previous emperor? Unless. Shang Junlin put his palm on Shin Yu's lower abdomen. You can give birth to one for me. Your majesty, do you think I have this ability? Shin Yu raised his eyebrows. If I work harder, you might be able to. Shang Junlin answered seriously. Shin Yu was speechless. I think your majesty only wants to work hard for this process. Shang Junlin smiled and bit his ear. How do you know if you don't try?
Chapter 176. Shin Yu nudged him with his elbow. Your majesty, you should think more realistically. This kind of thing won't happen no matter how hard you try. Shang Junlin grabbed his hand and held his wrist tightly. I know. Shin Yu struggled but couldn't get rid of the man's shackles. Fortunately, he let him go. How's the situation in the northern desert? The northern desert has been unwilling to compensate. After hearing that Fang Jiayi was the one who negotiated, several ministers claimed to be sick. The northern desert emperor lost his temper in the court and forced a few people to come out. Didn't the people who were chosen look bad? Of course. After the matter was settled, they scolded the officials who claimed to be sick in the court the next day. Even the northern desert emperor wasn't spared. Shin Yu could understand these people's thoughts. Fang Jiayi was too powerful. At first glance, this kind of thing wasn't a good job. No matter how it was done, they would only be scolded. Not only that, they would also be tortured internally. Not many people were willing to do this. As an official, There were some who didn't care about their own interests, but there were very few. Obviously, the Northern Desert officials didn't belong to this group. In order to negotiate for the quota, the Northern Desert officials fought hard. But unlike others, they didn't fight for the quota, but the quota that they didn't go. The news spread to Subei. He Qingyu, Jiang Huiqing, Fang Jie and the others gathered together. Some people couldn't help but laugh. The Northern Desert really thinks that Daheng is easy to bully. Let's see if we don't peel off a layer of their skin this time. They were all new officials sent to Subei. Most of them were still young and had ambitions in their hearts. In Subei, they had endless opportunities to show off their skills. They were happy to do anything that could make the people of the Northern Desert unhappy. Lady Fang is truly a woman who doesn't lose out to men. To be honest, at the beginning, I had some opinions about Lady Fang, and I didn't understand why His Majesty made an exception to allow a woman to enter the court as an official. Only now do I know how narrow-minded I was in the past. Today, I toast to Lady Fang. With that, the man raised his wine cup and drank it. Actually, me too. One after another, many people apologized for their prejudices. What I do is a little shocking. It's normal that you didn't understand it at first. Fang Jie smiled and drank the wine in her glass. It's my honor to work with you. Lord Fang, please don't say that. No matter how you look at it, it should be our honor. The atmosphere at the banquet became more and more lively. Jiang Huiqing and He Qingyu also clinked their wine glasses. The negotiations were set to take place before the new year. The Dahuan Imperial Court wanted the negotiations to be completed before the new year so that the Lin Yuanren could have a good new year. There were quite a few people living in the forest plains. They were all pure Northern Desert people. The Imperial Court had argued several times about whether or not to take them in. Some people believed that those who were not of the Great Huan dynasty had different intentions, so there was no need to care about these people. After occupying the forest plains, these people would naturally become slaves. Others believed that since they belonged to the Great Huan dynasty, they were the people of the Great Huan dynasty and should not be too harsh on them. Both sides clung to their own views and quarreled fiercely. But this matter would not affect the acquisition of the forest plains from the Northern Desert people. Everything was ready. Fang Jie changed into an official's robe and led the accompanying officials to the location of the negotiations with the Northern Desert people. As expected, the negotiation this time went very smoothly. The Northern Desert people wanted to play some tricks, but the Northern Army was watching from the side. If there was any movement, they would attack. At the negotiations, Fang Jie was like a fish in water. She killed the other side and forced them to retreat. At the end of the negotiations, the Dahuan officials were in high spirits. Fang Jie's face showed that she still wanted to continue. On the other hand, the Northern Desert officials were all ashen-faced and dispirited. On the spot, Fang Jie had them sign an agreement. From this day on, the forest plains belonged to the Dahuan dynasty. Jiang Huiqing followed the Northern Army to the forest plains. Before the Imperial Court officially appointed officials, the Northern Desert officials would temporarily govern this land. Many of the Northern Desert people who originally lived in the forest plains had moved away. Those who were left behind were ordinary herdsmen and abandoned slaves. Some of these slaves came from the Dahuan dynasty. After Jiang Huiqing brought people over, the first thing he did was to find the Dahuan people. After checking their backgrounds, he sent those who were willing to return to the Dahuan dynasty. Those who were unwilling to leave could continue to work in the forest plains. Shang Junlin did not hide his intentions. Soon, the forest plains would become the exclusive horse farm of the Dahuan dynasty. After Jiang Huiqing and the others went over, they needed to deal with any hidden dangers in the forest plains in advance. Congratulations, Your Majesty. You got what you wanted. Shen Yu put down the booklet from the northern desert and put his hands on the table. There are still many follow-up issues to deal with. Jiang Huiqing is a careful person. He has considered many problems in the forest plains, Shang Junlin said as he read through the booklet. What does your majesty plan to do with the northern desert people who stayed in the forest plains? Shen Yu asked. Observe them for a while. If they are loyal, I don't mind letting them live in the forest plains. The forest plains and the northern desert are close. Shen Yu looked down and thought. Is there a precedent of intermarriage between the two sides? Yes, there is. Why did you mention this? The officials have been arguing about whether these people should stay or leave. They are worried about all kinds of problems. In the end, isn't it because these people are northern desert people? What if one day, they admit that they are Dahuan people from the bottom of their hearts? In order to tame the people, blindly killing them was not enough. The estrangement in their hearts had to be broken. They had to be tied to the Dahuan dynasty. They were bound together for good or ill. Only when the interests of the people were completely in agreement could some situations be prevented. Shen Yu slowly expressed his thoughts. Your Majesty, you can encourage them to intermarry with the Dahuan dynasty and let them get used to speaking the Dahuan language. You can send teachers from the Dahuan dynasty to teach their children. When this group of people grow old and the younger generation who have been educated by the Dahuan dynasty grow up, will they still admit that they were once northern desert people? Shang Junlin thought about Shen Yu's words. After a few generations, they will completely abandon their identity as northern desert people and truly integrate into the Dahuan dynasty. Yes, this method will take a long time. But it was gentler than any other method. The problem that the imperial court had been arguing about for many days had been solved. It was getting closer and closer to the end of the year. There was still no movement from the King of Yu. In the Northern Desert Army, the general who had returned to the capital to report on his work was ready to leave. Gu Huai was among them. They should have left earlier. But they had been delayed for a while to deal with the Northern Desert matters. When they left, it was already very late. They were in a hurry. Coming back with Gu Huai was the general who had a good relationship with him. Now he was his adjutant. I have never been to the capital. General, is the capital really as prosperous as the rumors say? The adjutant couldn't help but ask during the journey. It is very prosperous. You will know when you see it. The closer they were to the capital, the more difficult it was for Gu Huai to calm down. After the war with the Northern Desert, he wrote a long letter to Imperial Physician Gu. In the letter, he explained part of the reason why he joined the army and what happened in the Northern Desert. When he left, it seemed that he left without saying goodbye. Although he wrote a letter later, Gu Huai was still worried that Imperial Physician Gu would be angry. The capital was very lively. In order to welcome the coming new year, the shops and stalls were filled with New Year's items. People came and went in the streets and alleys. It was very lively. After the result of the negotiation with the Northern Desert came back, the people in the capital talked about one more topic. Have you seen the report this time? The Northern Desert people really think we are easy to bully. They still want to delay and say that they can't gather the materials. I think they want to renege on the debt. Maybe they think that if they delay for a long time, we will forget about it. But no matter how nicely they say it, we will not be fooled. Why should we give up something that belongs to us? Isn't that so? Master Fong of the Northern Desert is really powerful. After so many times, won't the Northern Desert people tremble when they hear her name? Ha 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 ha, they also have a day like this. Master Fong's way of doing things is really satisfying. You don't need to be too kind to your enemies. I have a rumor here. Do you know? The Northern Desert people wrote a letter to our emperor asking him to transfer Master Fong back to the capital. She can't stay in the northern desert. They can't take it. Ha ha ha. Really? My uncle works in Master Duan's house. How can the news from there be false? Imperial physician Gu walked on the street and heard all kinds of discussions. When talking about the northern desert, there was no lack of people talking about the battles that Gu Huai participated in. The Gu Huai in these people's mouths was not the same person as the younger brother he had been with for several years. He always felt that it was unreal. Imperial physician Gu stopped in front of a small stall. The stall was full of different kinds of lanterns. In the past, when he was busy, it was Gu Huai who bought these things. This year, Gu Huai was not here, so the house had been deserted. Do you want a pair? Don't be fooled by my small stall, my lanterns sell very well. Imperial physician Gu stopped for a moment. Under the enthusiasm of the stall owner, he bought a pair back. Every household began to prepare for the upcoming new year. The palace also began to decorate. Without needing Shang Junlin and Shen Yu's instructions, eunuch Meng had already arranged for people to decorate the palace. In Yuzhang Palace, Shen Yu leaned on the soft couch and watched the palace servants bustling in and out. Young master, take a look and see if there is anything that needs to be changed. Mu Shi came in with a hot drink and put it beside Shen Yu's hand. The sweet smell floated along with the hot air. Shen Yu looked at the cup and asked, "What is this?" "This is the milk soup newly developed by the small kitchen. It is made with fresh fruits and milk. Young master, try it and see if you like it." Shen Yu was used to the new products that the small kitchen sent from time to time. He took a sip and the milk and fresh fruits perfectly blended together. The taste was sweet but not greasy. It was the taste that Shen Yu liked. After drinking the milk soup in the small bowl, Shen Yu stood up and looked around. "You have decorated it well. There is nothing to change." While talking, Shang Junlin, who had just finished the morning court, came in. "Something happened in the court today. It is about Duke Xinbei. Do you want to hear it?" Shang Junlin untied his cloak and threw it to eunuch Meng. "What happened to Duke Xinbei?" In this life, Shen Yu did not pay much attention to Duke Xinbei's family. At first, he asked people outside to keep an eye on Duke Xinbei's residence and report to him from time to time. Later, he simply handed this matter over to Mu Shi. If nothing important happened, he was too lazy to care. Today, Duke Xinbei asked the court to appoint an heir. Shang Junlin's voice was slightly deep. "An heir? Besides me and Shen Qingran, Duke Xinbei has other children." Chapter 177. If Shen Yu's memory was correct, there should only be him and Shen Qingran in the Count of Jinbei's residence. Or, in this life, Shen Qingran lost his value and Count of Jinbei had another child. With Count of Jinbei's temperament, this was not impossible. But if there was suddenly an heir in the Count of Jinbei's residence, Mu Shi should have mentioned it to him. "No," Shang Junlin stroked Shen Yu's cheek, "Count of Jinbei wants to appoint you." "Me?" Shen Yu was even more surprised. "I have already entered the palace. Why does he want to appoint me as the heir? Does he think that I can go back and inherit the Count of Jinbei's residence after entering the palace? Not to mention that he couldn't inherit it with his current status. Even if he could, Shen Yu didn't care. He wanted this position before only because it was what he should have. Instead of letting others take it, it was better to hold it firmly in his own hands. He said that you are the only legitimate son of the Count of Jinbei's residence. Logically speaking, this position should be yours. Not only Shang Junlin, but also the ministers who heard Count of Jinbei's words in the morning court showed a strange expression. They really didn't understand why Count of Jinbei suddenly said this. If he really wanted to appoint a legitimate son as the heir, why didn't he mention it before Jinbei entered the palace for more than 10 years? He only mentioned it after Jinbei entered the palace and was favored by the emperor. Many people looked at Count of Jinbei with strange eyes. Didn't Count of Jinbei feel it? How could he not feel the undisguised gaze? Even Shang Junlin's gaze on him was like a needle on a carpet. Count of Jinbei, are you joking with me by mentioning it at this time? Everyone could feel the anger under Shang Junlin's calm tone. Count of Jinbei hurriedly knelt down. I don't dare. It's just that this position should be his. I was obsessed in the past. I doted on my concubine and son and neglected Xiao Yu. I want to take advantage of the opportunity now to make up for my past mistakes one by one. Shang Junlin looked at him condescendingly. He didn't agree or refuse. Count of Jinbei still wanted to say something, but Shang Junlin interrupted him. Now a Yu is my Count of Jinbei's residence. Count of Jinbei's residence is his past. I don't care how you suddenly came up with this idea. Whether it's sincere or not. Directly refused. The ministers couldn't understand what was happening in front of Jinbei. After the court Jinbei's residence, they couldn't help but talk about it. Count of Jinbei. Why did he say he wants to appoint the heir at this time? If he really wanted to have a legitimate son, he would have done so a long time ago. The heir he originally wanted was that bastard who sided with outsiders. Could it be that he regretted it? What's the use of regretting now? She has already been sent to the palace by him. It is even more unrealistic to ask His Majesty to let her go now. Not to mention how much His Majesty is favored now. Even if she is an unfavored concubine, there is no reason to do this. That's right. Given how much His Majesty favors His Majesty probably doesn't care about the position of Crown Prince. If His Majesty really cared about this, he wouldn't have entered the palace in the first place. No one could understand Duke Jinbei's sudden action. Even the officials who had a good relationship with Duke Jinbei were confused. I didn't promise him. A Yu can only be tied to me from now on. Shang Junlin held Xin Yu's hand and sat down on the soft couch. Even if His Majesty agrees, I can't agree. From the moment I entered the palace, I had nothing to do with the residence of Count North. However, Xin Yu was also very curious about why Duke Jinbei would do this. Did something happen to Count North's mansion recently? Except for this, Xin Yu couldn't think of any other reason. No, except for some small disputes, Count North's mansion is as usual. Shang Junlin wouldn't lie to him about this kind of thing. Xin Yu ruled out this possibility. Since nothing happened to Count North's mansion, why did Duke Jinbei suddenly ask for the position of Crown Prince for him? In fact, Duke Jinbei was right about one thing. The position of Crown Prince originally belonged to Xin Yu. If Duke Jinbei didn't favor Xin Qingran and his mother and didn't want to give him the position of Crown Prince, he would have been the legitimate Crown Prince of Count North's mansion. A few days later, news came from Count North's mansion that Duke Jinbei was looking for a wife for Xin Qingran. Xin Qingran and Xin Yu were about the same age. They were indeed old enough to look for a wife. First, Duke Jinbei asked Xin Yu to be the Crown Prince. Then, Duke Jinbei asked for Xin Qingran's marriage. Was there any connection between the two? Which family did Duke Jinbei show Xin Qingran? Xin Yu asked as he rubbed the wall of his cup. It's the daughter of the collateral branch of the Duan family. Shang Junlin told him the news that the hidden dragon guards found out. There are also the daughters of the Yi family and the Qin family. Without exception, they were all girls from the aristocratic families in the capital. Perhaps Duke Jinbei didn't choose the girls from the province, but the power behind them. Marriage alliance. This kind of thing was very common in aristocratic families. Xin Yu didn't find it strange that Duke Jinbei would choose marriage alliance. But the person of marriage alliance was Xin Qingran. They are all willing to marry their daughters to Xin Qingran. Although he is the son of a concubine, he is the only person in the Duke Shinbei's mansion who has the possibility of inheriting the Duke Shinbei's mansion. Moreover, he has you as his legitimate brother. It is normal for these people to be tempted. Shang Junlin was right. Not everyone knew about the grudge between Shin Yu and the Duke Shinbei's mansion. In the eyes of outsiders, although Shin Yu and the Duke Shinbei's mansion weren't close, they weren't at the point of killing each other. No matter what happened in between, it couldn't change the fact that he was the legitimate son of Duke Shinbei. Even fewer people knew about the grudge between him and Shin Qingran. Before entering the palace, Shin Yu lived in seclusion and didn't have a strong presence in the capital. Shin Qingran wasn't stupid enough to go around telling everyone how he bullied his legitimate brother in the Duke Shinbei's mansion. Duke Shinbei's mansion. After many days, Duke Shinbei once again stepped into Shin Qingran's courtyard. After being locked up for a period of time, Shin Qingran was much more well-behaved. 2 months ago, Duke Shinbei lifted his confinement. He could move freely in the mansion, but he couldn't leave the mansion. Shin Qingran also understood that Duke Shinbei didn't have any old affection for his father. When you were useful to him, he would treat you well. When you were useless, he would kick you away without any mercy. Father, why are you here? Shin Qingran learned how to disguise himself after bumping into a wall so many times. You have reached the age of marriage. I have looked at a few girls for you. You can choose by yourself. Duke Shinbei raised his hand. The manservant behind him carried a list of names and put it on the table. Shin Qingran almost couldn't maintain the expression on his face. Father, are you here for this? Your brother has been in the palace for a year. You should also get married. After you get married, you can have children for the mansion as soon as possible. The meaning of Duke Shinbei's words was very obvious. Shin Qingran's face showed a strange expression. Father, you know that I like men. Duke Shinbei waved his hand impatiently. I just want you to marry a legal wife. You are the only one in the mansion now. After you give birth to a child, you can like whoever you want. Father, you are right. Shin Qingran glanced at the list on the table. I will read it carefully. They are all girls with good family backgrounds. You should hurry up and choose, so that I can reply to the girl's family as soon as possible. After Duke Shinbei left, Shin Qingran walked to the table and sat down. He slowly opened the list. Duke Shinbei didn't lie to him. The girls with names in the list all had good family backgrounds. Seriously, Shin Qingran would be climbing up the social ladder if he married these girls. The news of Duke Shinbei's mansion spread to the palace. Mu Shi knew that Shin Yu had been paying attention to what happened in Duke Shinbei's mansion recently. She immediately told Shin Yu when she got the news. Shin Yu asked them to continue paying attention. In Hangzhou, because of the arrival of King Yu's group, there was no New Year's atmosphere. King Yu was now living in the Qing family's mansion. The Qing family only knew what kind of boat they were tied to after King Yu's arrival. It wasn't that no one was dissatisfied, but they had no other choice but to follow King Yu. The situation outside was tense, and King Yu wasn't in the mood to celebrate. Compared to this, he hoped that the people Mr. Tan mentioned could come quickly. He really didn't want to be trapped here anymore. Mr. Tan, how long will it take for the people you said to come to our rescue? They have already arrived. They are in the mountains behind Hangzhou. They have to wait for a suitable time to attack from both inside and outside and break out of the encirclement. Hearing this, King Yu's heart slowly fell. Where are my people? Did Mr. Tan come to their rescue? According to Mr. Tan, the reason why the people came so late was to take a detour to bring the forces that King Yu left in his fief over. Don't worry, Your Highness. They are already on their way. King Yu knew that what he did would bring big trouble. Before he was 100% sure, he was very careful not to let the imperial court notice that something was wrong. It was convenient for them at this time. The imperial court didn't know where King Yu's forces were. Those people were hidden very well. Even if they sent people to Yuezhou, they wouldn't be able to find them in a short time. Mr. Tan took the tea from the maid and took a sip. There is one more thing. Recently, my people received a special cooperation invitation. Is Your Highness interested? King Yu, oh. Mr. Tan, it is from the northern desert. They said that there is a person who is willing to help Your Highness. King Yu, people from the northern desert. Weren't they just defeated by the northern army? Mr. Tan kept him in suspense, yes and no. When the time comes, Your Highness will know. King Yu had no other choice. If he wanted to have the strength to fight Shang Junlin, he didn't have enough people in his hands. He didn't have time to think about why these people were helping him. He just wanted to change his current situation as soon as possible. He didn't want to be suppressed by Shang Junlin. One day, Shang Junlin would be his defeated opponent. The humiliation he suffered would be returned 1,000 times. Young master, the people we sent to Hanzhou have sent back news. King Yu seems to have two forces in contact. At noon, Mu Shi came in with warm water. Shen Yu washed his hands and used a handkerchief to dry them. I know. Pay more attention to that side. It would be best if we can find out where the forces in contact with them are. This servant understands. Mu Shi handed the basin to the palace servant and continued, Jinbei Ho sent a letter to you again. Do you want to meet him? Since Shen Yu entered the palace, Jinbei Ho had sent many letters to the palace. Every month, he would write 3 times a month. Except for a few times, Shen Yu would pretend that he didn't see it. Jinbei Ho was furious, but he couldn't do anything if he didn't see him. This time, for some reason, Jinbei Ho had been sending letters to the palace for several days. The messenger said that Jinbei Ho had something important to discuss with His Highness and hoped that His Highness would agree. Shen Yu was curious about what Jinbei Ho wanted to do. After pondering for a moment, he said, yes. If Shen Yu wanted to meet Jinbei Ho, he could just call him into the palace. Before meeting him, Shen Yu told Shang Junlin that Shang Junlin wanted to accompany him. Shen Yu felt that if Shang Junlin was here, Jinbei Ho wouldn't say a lot of things. Your Majesty, do you want to leave first? I want to know what Jinbei Ho wants to say to me. Am I so shameful? Shang Junlin pinched Shen Yu's face. Shen Yu slapped his hand away, Your Majesty, you know that's not what I mean. Then, you, give me a kiss, and I'll do whatever you want. Shen Yu glanced at him and gave him a perfunctory kiss on his face. Shang Junlin was not satisfied, but he was pushed into the inner room by Shen Yu. I've kissed you. Your Majesty, please wait here for a while. When Jinbei Ho arrived, he only saw Shen Yu sitting on the main seat. What does Master Ho want to say to me? I wrote a letter to ask for the title of heir apparent for you, but it was rejected by Your Majesty. Jinbei Ho knew that Shen Yu didn't like to talk nonsense, so he went straight to the point. Did Jinbei Ho come here for this? Shen Yu said casually. It seemed that he didn't care about this matter at all. Jinbei Ho was stunned. After a while, he said, I chose a wife for Shen Qingran from a famous family. When his first child is born, he will be adopted under your name. He will inherit the title of Marquis Mansion in the future. Shen Yu couldn't help but laugh out loud. Don't you think you're dreaming too much? Chapter 178. Through a child, he was completely tied to the Count of Jinbei. Did he really think he was stupid? Not to mention his current identity. If he adopted his child, wouldn't he also become His Majesty's child? I just want to correct the mistakes of the past. The heir of the Count of Jinbei must be from the direct line of descent. I only have 2 sons in my life, but you entered the imperial palace. Shen Yu was impatient to hear him say these words. didn't you want to make Shin Qingran the heir of Jinbei before? It's the same to make him the heir now. How can it be the same? Count of Jinbei was a little anxious. Only you are the only legitimate son of the Count of Jinbei. It turns out that you also know that only I am the legitimate son, Shin Yu sneered. When concubine Ru and her son were in power, you didn't say so. I thought that in your heart, whether you are the legitimate son or not is not important at all. I know that you have been blaming me for the past. I don't dare. If Count of Jinbei only comes for this matter, I advise you not to make trouble and don't harm other people's good girls. No matter what plan you have in mind, I won't agree to the adoption. Count of Jinbei was a little embarrassed when he was rejected by Shin Yu mercilessly. I know that you don't like Shin Qingran. When the child is born, I will make sure that Shin Qingran never appears in front of you, and the child will not know who his biological father is. Let me tell you this. In fact, I don't want to continue my bloodline at all, and I don't want to have a child for no reason. Now I am a noble. Count of Jinbei, have you thought about what this means? It means that my child will also be His Majesty's child. Why do you think that the courtiers are willing to see His Majesty have a child who is not related to his bloodline? You don't want a legitimate heir, but an heir who can have a relationship with His Majesty because of me. Shin Yu looked directly at Duke Jinbei, as if he wanted to see through his heart. Marquis Jinbei's face turned red. He really thought so. He didn't want the power of Marquis Jinbei to fall into the hands of others. The only candidates he could choose were Shin Yu and Shin Qingran. He originally wanted to ask Shin Yu to be the heir and find a way to adopt a child for him. In the future, this child would inherit the Marquis manor. However, His Majesty didn't agree. He could only skip this step and directly jump to the next step. The matter of appointing Shin Qingran as the heir was no longer within the scope of his consideration. Not to mention that Shin Qingran's identity as a concubine's son could not inherit the Lord Protector's manor. Even if he could, Count North Marquis would not be willing to hand over the Lord Protector's manor to him. What he wanted was for the Lord Protector's manor to become better and better. He didn't want the Lord Protector's manor to become someone else's. Father, this is for your own good. Since ancient times, emperors have been fickle. Don't look at how you are favored by the emperor now. Can you guarantee that he will still treat you like this 5 years later or 10 years later? In addition to the emperor's favor, you also need to find yourself someone to rely on. This is between His Majesty and me. Count North Marquis, you don't need to worry about it. Count North Marquis looked at Shin Yu as if he was looking at an ignorant child. Your Majesty should also think more for yourself. You are the legitimate son. You should inherit the Lord Protector's manor. Since Count North Marquis also said that I should inherit the Lord Protector's manor, then why didn't I say anything before I entered the palace? Shin Yu interrupted him again. Count North Marquis was blocked and had nothing to say. Because at that time, his mind was full of thinking about how to give the position of heir to Shin Qingran. If I said that I regretted it, would your Majesty believe me? Of course, why not? After I entered the palace, Count North Marquis should have seen clearly what kind of person Shin Qingran is. Do you think that the Lord Protector's manor will be finished in his hands sooner or later? At this time, you will think of your eldest son who was abandoned by you. Comparing the two, the advantage of the legitimate son is more obvious. Regret was the easiest emotion for people to have. It was also the most helpless emotion. I know that it is too late to say anything now. But today's matter is not something that your Majesty can say no to. The heir of the Lord Protector's manor must be from the legitimate line of descent. According to the law of Dahuan, whether Shin Yu entered the palace or not, Shin Qingran was not qualified to inherit the Lord Protector's manor. Count North Marquis only had one legitimate son, Shin Yu. If Shin Yu could not inherit the Lord Protector's manor, he could only choose from the next generation of Shin Yu. From a certain point of view, what Count North Marquis said was also true. Count North Marquis is old but vigorous. It is not a problem for you to have another legitimate son. Before I entered the palace, I also said that I can ask His Majesty to grant me a marriage. Compared to what I said before, isn't it better for you to have one yourself? Shen Yu did not hide his sarcasm in his tone. Count North Marquis was so angry that his neck turned red. He thought that Shen Yu would not agree, but he did not expect that Shen Yu would treat him so harshly. When did this situation start? Count North Marquis was in a trance for a moment. It seemed that he woke up after fainting when he heard that he was going to enter the palace. Is this how you talk to your father? Count North Marquis's expression changed a few times. Am I not telling the truth? If you want someone to inherit the Lord Protector's manor, it is better to have another legitimate son. Then you can save the step of adopting him. Shen Yu was smiling, but there was no smile in his eyes. You. Count North Marquis's words were stuck in his throat. Shang Junlin came out from behind the screen. His voice was unclear whether he was happy or angry. I didn't know that Count North Marquis was still thinking about adopting a child for Guijun. I dare not. Count North Marquis suddenly knelt down. His back was covered with sweat. He did not know when Shang Junlin came and how much he had heard of the conversation. But he knew that from this moment on, his plan was doomed to fail. Even if you are Guijun's father, I don't want you to intervene in our private affairs. Do you understand? I understand. I crossed the line. Please forgive me, Your Majesty. Count North Marquis's forehead touched the ground. His heart seemed to be clenched by a big hand. Under the high tension, his breathing began to be irregular. Under the heavy pressure, he could not even raise his head to look at Shang Junlin's expression. I have said before that since Guijun entered the palace, he is my man. He has nothing to do with your manor of Count North. He will not be the heir of the manor of Count North, nor will he inherit the title of Count North Marquis. This time, because you are Guijun's father, I will not blame you for sowing discord between me and Guijun in front of Guijun. I don't want to see the same thing happen again. Yes, I dare not do it again. Get out. Count North Marquis did not dare to stay for a moment and got out. Why is Your Majesty angrier than me? Shen Yu smoothed the wrinkles between Shang Junlin's eyebrows. The unhappiness caused by Count North Marquis in his heart quickly dissipated. Shang Junlin held Shen Yu in his arms without saying a word. The man's high body temperature warmed Shen Yu. After a while, Shang Junlin whispered, I will never change the way I treat you. The next day, Shang Junlin directly took away Count North Marquis's position in the imperial court. The ministers did not know why. Later, they faintly heard that His Majesty did this because Count North Marquis made Guijun unhappy. Shang Junlin heard what Count North Marquis said that day. This position-taking was a warning to him. He thought that he would be able to rise again one day. However, he did not know that the ending of Count North Marquis's manor had already been written by Shen Yu. They were only waiting for the last moment to come. Time passed slowly. Gu Huai set off from Subei with his men. They were getting closer and closer to the capital. Reporting to General, there are traces of unknown forces ahead. Gu Huai pulled the reins to stop the horse. Send someone to take a look. When he was in Subei, Gu Huai received news about Hanzhou City. He also knew that there might be unknown forces in other places aside from Hanzhou City. He brought 5,000 men with him. If they encountered the rebels along the way, it would be best if they could deal with them directly. The scout that was sent out soon returned. Based on the initial analysis, there are 2,000 people ahead. They are heading towards Hanzhou City. General, what should we do now? Gu Huai briefly pondered. First, determine their origin. If they are with King Yu, deal with them on the spot. Yes. It took some time to deal with the 2,000 people. He had no idea if it was because of the path that they chose. Ever since they encountered the first batch of King Yu's men, they would encounter them one after another. Under the moonlight, Gu Huai wiped his sword. The adjutant took a sip of water and said, "According to this speed, we won't be able to reach the capital on time. Will the imperial court be unhappy with us for bringing our men out?" The adjutant's worries weren't unfounded. Although 5,000 men wasn't a lot, it wasn't a small number either. The imperial court had given them plenty of time. If it wasn't for dealing with King Yu's men, they wouldn't have wasted so much time. There's no need to worry. Gu Huai came to Subei as a hidden dragon guard, so he had a method to contact the hidden dragon guards. When he discovered that the first batch might be King Yu's men, he had contacted the hidden dragon guards. The news should have reached the capital by now. But it was a pity. He initially thought that he could spend the new year with his brother. Gu Huai encountered King Yu's men. Shang Junlin closed the letter and placed it on the table. On the way back from Subei. Yes, and it's not just one batch. He suspects that there are other forces heading towards Hanzhou City as well. Since they had discovered them, there was no reason for them to let them go. Shang Junlin instructed Gu Huai to provide support, and it would be best if they could clean up the path. Along the way, Gu Huai's men increased, and the number of rebels that he dealt with increased. Bang! The vase fell to the ground with a loud bang. "We can't wait any longer. The people we've been hiding in the dark have been discovered." Mr. Tan looked anxious. "Aside from the 100,000 men in Hanzhou City, how many are there outside? Can they help us break out of the encirclement?" After venting his anger, the viciousness on King Yu's face dissipated. "There are 80,000 of them that we can use right now. As for the rest, we can't wait any longer." Mr. Tan initially wanted to wait for those people to arrive before making a move. But now that a mysterious force had wiped out a few of their strongholds, it was only a matter of time before the rest were discovered. The snow was getting heavier. As the snow fell, the patrolling soldiers suddenly felt that something was amiss and sounded the alarm. The gates of Hanzhou City that had been closed for many days opened and archers stood on the city walls. "Release the arrows." The sound of swords rang out for a long time. The news was quickly sent to the capital. "It looks like Gu Huai's actions have disrupted their plans." Shen Yu slowly sat beside Shang Junlin. "Gu Huai has made a great contribution this time. I have ordered him to bring his men to Hanzhou City. Calculating the time, they should arrive in a few days." King Yu stood on the city walls and looked at the flames of war below with a smile. They were about to win. The Great Huan army that was guarding Hanzhou City did not expect that King Yu's men would be hiding outside, so they were caught unprepared. Chapter 179. There were no signs before Hanzhou City launched their attack. If it wasn't for the soldiers that were prepared, they would have suffered a great loss. The disparity in strength between the two sides wasn't great, and the situation was in a stalemate until another unknown force joined the battle and attacked the Great Huan army from the back. Being attacked from the front and back, the Great Huan army was caught off guard and fell into a disadvantage. The appearance of the first unknown force seemed to have flipped a switch, and for the next few days, more and more soldiers appeared. The imperial court estimated that the King of Yu had 100,000 soldiers, and the soldiers that came to encircle the Great Huan army was based on that number. But now, a bunch of people that were loyal to the King of Yu had appeared out of nowhere, and the Great Huan army couldn't hold on any longer. "General, we can't go on like this. We have to report this to the imperial court." "We have already reported it, and the imperial court has also sent someone over. But it will take some time for them to arrive. We have to hold on during this period." "Yes. War was never a game, and the Hangzhou city that was engulfed in the war was practically destroyed. Roars and cries rang out endlessly. The snow was cold, but the blood was warm. Countless people fell, and countless people stood up. Behind them were their citizens, and they had to use themselves to build the strongest city wall. When the news reached the imperial court, it caused a huge commotion. Didn't they say that there were only 100,000 soldiers? What's with the extra 100,000? Send reinforcements. We can't let the king of you succeed. Countless orders were sent out, and they were executed at the fastest speed. At this moment, everyone was standing on the same battle line. Gu Huai received a secret order from the hidden dragon guards along with a tiger tally that could be used to mobilize troops along the way. Now, it was handed over to Gu Huai by Shang Junlin. When Gu Huai left Subei, he brought 5,000 soldiers with him, and now, he had no less than 100,000 soldiers. Not many people in the imperial court knew that Shang Junlin wanted him to change the route to Hangzhou city. On the surface, Shang Junlin even sent another general over to provide reinforcements. The sudden war broke the festive atmosphere of the new year. For a moment, the entire capital became solemn. To prevent any accidents from happening in the capital, they had to leave a sufficient garrison in the capital, and the number of people that could be sent out was limited. Compared to transferring troops from the capital, Shang Junlin was more inclined to transfer troops from the vicinity of Hangzhou city. During this period of time, Shang Junlin had been very busy. The time he spent in Yuzhang Palace was greatly reduced. If he was not discussing matters in the imperial court, he was discussing matters in the imperial study. Young master, are you not worried? Mu Shi vaguely knew a little about the grudge between his young master and the king of Yu. Now that the king of Yu had rebelled, not to mention the ministers, even the palace servants were somewhat uneasy. On the other hand, Shen Yu was still the same as before. There's nothing to worry about. I believe in your majesty. Shen Yu fiddled with the leaves of the Junling and didn't even raise his head. After being placed in the bedroom for a few days, the Junling regained its vitality and was no longer listless. Shen Yu moved it back to the greenhouse, but it started to wilt again after 2 days. Shen Yu had no choice but to bring it back to the bedroom. They have already investigated the matter that young master instructed them to investigate. There are some clues now. One of the connections between the king of Yu and the outside world is connected to the northern desert, and the other one has yet to be found. Sure enough, the king of Yu has formed a relationship with the northern desert. Are there any northern desert people among the troops that came to Hangzhou city? Currently, there aren't any. The news that came from the other side is that both sides have yet to reach an agreement. It's a good thing for the Great Huan Kingdom. The northern desert couldn't even take care of themselves, so how could they be in the mood to help the king of Yu? The reason was that the emperor of the northern desert wanted to send troops to help the king of Yu, but the other members of the royal family didn't agree. Seeing that they couldn't persuade the emperor, they simply contacted the ministers who didn't agree and killed the emperor. Now that the northern desert was fighting for the throne, they couldn't find the time to get involved in the Great Huan Kingdom's matter. The mastermind behind the scenes didn't expect such a change in the middle of the process. His men finally convinced the former emperor of the northern desert to send troops, but they were killed in the blink of an eye. He was also imprisoned because of this. This chess piece was completely useless. The king of Yu and Mr. Tan, who were in Hangzhou city, were still waiting for the northern desert's reply. Unfortunately, no matter how many letters they sent out, there was no reply. Fortunately, they didn't place their hopes in the northern desert, so the lack of reply didn't affect them much. After waiting for a long time, the king of Yu finally saw his subordinates. His confidant also came with him. I finally see the king. In the study room, the confidant bowed to the king of Yu. Everyone, please rise. The king of Yu first expressed his concern before asking about the situation in Yuezhou. Fortunately, His Highness sent people there in time. If they were late, we would have been trapped in Yuezhou. The officials sent by the imperial court this time were very difficult to get rid of. If it weren't for Mr. Min and Mr. Tang, we wouldn't have been able to get out. What about them? The king of Yu had a vague idea in his heart, but he held on to a tiny bit of hope that he was wrong. They stayed in Yuezhou so that we could leave smoothly. If they stayed at this time, it would only end in disaster. The study room fell into a long silence, and some people's eyes turned red. After a long time, the king of Yu said in a hoarse voice, "I will remember the kindness of the two gentlemen. One day, I will avenge the two gentlemen." It was time for Imperial Physician Gu to take Shen Yu's pulse again. Shen Yu was recuperating well and his body was much better than before. He also took less medicine. Although it couldn't be cured for the time being, Shen Yu was very satisfied with the result. After taking the pulse, Imperial Physician Gu adjusted the prescription slightly. The new prescription is to take it once every 2 days. After a while, you can stop taking medicine. Nothing made Shen Yu happier than this sentence. After his rebirth, he had taken medicine for almost a year. He felt that the medicine was going to be salted soon. "Thank you, Imperial Physician Gu. Mu Shi, bring the small box I prepared earlier and give it to Imperial Physician Gu." Mu Shi obeyed. After a while, she came back with a small box. "Take it as a thank you for taking care of me for the past year. This is a small token of my appreciation. You must accept it." "You don't have to. His Majesty and you have given me many rewards. This is my duty. You don't have to do this." In the end, Imperial Physician Gu accepted Shen Yu's gift. Thinking of Junling, who had been acting strangely recently, Shen Yu told Imperial Physician Gu about its situation. I have never encountered such a situation. Let me go back and check if I can find out the reason." When Shang Junlin came back, the sky was already dark. Shen Yu was writing something under the lamp. He stopped the palace servant from reporting and slowly walked over. Shen Yu heard the footsteps and raised his head. "His Majesty is back. What is you doing?" When he came closer, he found that the paper in front of Shen Yu was full of his name. Shang Junlin was stunned. Shen Yu lowered his head and looked at the paper full of Shang Junlin. His face turned red. He was distracted just now. Without realizing it, he wrote so many names of Shang Junlin. Now, it was seen by the person himself. Shen Yu panicked and tried to cover up the evidence of his crime. His hand was grabbed by the man. Shang Junlin rescued the paper from Shen Yu's hand and put it aside to dry. The ink on the paper was not dry yet. Shen Yu was a little dizzy because of his actions just now. He only had time to say one word. Shen Yu's eyes suddenly widened. He felt a warm touch on his lips. The man's kiss was fierce and urgent. It was as if he wanted to swallow him whole. The tip of his teeth touched his soft lips. "Today is the last battle. We will break through the blockade of the imperial court and start a new journey." The king of Yu looked at the soldiers standing neatly below. His heart was filled with pride. Soon, his wish would come true. Charge! Everything was as the king of Yu expected. The Great Huan Kingdom's army was attacked from the front and the back. They were no match for the Great Huan Kingdom's army. The king of Yu was protected on the city wall. He didn't need to come, but he wanted to see the moment the Great Huan Kingdom's army was defeated. It would be soon. The smile on the king of Yu's face grew bigger and bigger. Suddenly, the smile on his face froze. He saw that even further away, there were thousands of soldiers and horses galloping over. He turned his head and looked at Mr. Tan, whose face had turned ugly. His voice trembled. Are they also here to help us? Chapter 180. Mr. Tan's expression had already explained everything. King Yu felt as if he was thrown into a bottomless abyss. A chill rose from the bottom of his heart and spread throughout his body. His hot-bloodedness from before instantly turned cold. King Yu refused to accept the truth before him. Just when he thought that he had seen the light, someone slammed the window shut and told him that it was all fake. No one could accept that. King Yu unconsciously tightened his grip on Mr. Tan's shoulder. Feeling the pain, Mr. Tan pushed his hand away, get them to retreat first and close the gate. It wasn't that they wanted to retreat, but the army had forced them to retreat and find another way out. King Yu gnashed his teeth. He wasn't willing to give up just like that. We can't retreat. If we're trapped in the city again, we won't have any chance. We have to end this quickly and break out of the encirclement as soon as possible. Mr. Tan briefly pondered and felt that King Yu's words were reasonable. They couldn't be trapped in Hangzhou City, or they might die here. This was their only chance. As they spoke, the people below also noticed that something was amiss. Is someone coming? Our men. Or the imperial court. Not only were the soldiers under King Yu, but the imperial court's army was also the same. When the battle started, they knew that King Yu had a backup plan, but they didn't expect the other party to be so much stronger than them. The general had already written a request for help from the imperial court. The reason why they waited until now was to delay King Yu and wait for reinforcements. After fighting for so long, they could no longer hold on. If the imperial court still didn't send reinforcements, King Yu might be able to break out of the encirclement today. General, there are traces of a large number of troops nearby. The man who was addressed as the general grabbed onto his sword and asked, are they our men or King Yu's men? As soon as he finished speaking, the surrounding people all held their breaths. Many times in the past, after they heard such reports, King Yu's forces would grow stronger. From being able to crush the other party in the beginning to being evenly matched, it only took less than a month for them to be crushed by the other party. They wished that they could hear a different answer. General, it's the imperial court's army. The soldier couldn't conceal the excitement on his face. Hearing his words, everyone felt relieved. When everyone looked at the general, they saw that there wasn't any trace of relaxation on his face and his brows were tightly knitted. General. Don't let your guard down. Carefully confirm the other party's identity. Yes. The general's words cleared their minds. They recalled what had happened not long ago. The King of Yu's men had disguised themselves as soldiers of the imperial court to get close to them. If not for the general's timely reaction, they might have already been killed by the enemy. Gu Huai brought his men closer. Everyone saw the flag they were holding high. It was the symbol of De Huan. The people sent by His Majesty have arrived. Gu Huai's arrival completely reversed the situation on the battlefield. Like a landslide, the dark clouds that shrouded the sky above Hangzhou City had finally dispersed. Before the new year, the imperial court received news that the rebels had been executed. The King of Yu escaped under the cover of his trusted aides. Before they could get far, Gu Huai's men caught up with them and captured them. In this battle, Gu Huai had once again made a great contribution. As one of the commanders, Gu Huai rode at the front of the group when they returned to the capital. The citizens of the capital lined the streets to welcome them. They had already received the news of the King of Yu's defeat from the newspapers. The King of Yu, Mr. Tan, and the rest were locked up in prison wagons, attracting countless rotten eggs and leaves. The King of Yu blankly looked at everything before him. It wasn't easy for him to escape from the capital, but he came back in such a sorry state. The difference in his heart was too great, and he no longer knew what expression he should show. A rotten egg smashed into his head with a bang and broke. A disgusting stench instantly overflowed. In the beginning, the King of Yu was still unhappy and frowned. But now, he no longer had any expression when facing this. Along the way, he could only hear the disdain directed at him. The ones responsible for escorting the King of Yu's group back to the capital were the 5,000 troops that Gu Huai brought back from the Subei province. The troops that the imperial court sent to Hangzhou City were temporarily left there to deal with the aftermath. To show the importance of a meritorious official returning to the capital, the imperial court would send officials to receive them. If the meritorious service was great enough, the emperor would personally receive them. This time, Gu Huai had rendered meritorious service twice, and even turned the tide to capture the King of Yu. The imperial court had to pay attention to him. On the day that Gu Huai brought people back, Shen Yu and Shang Junlin changed into casual clothes and left the palace. In the restaurant and tea house, everyone was talking about the King of Yu. This time, Shen Yu and Shang Junlin didn't choose the Yingxing Tower. Instead, they chose another tea house and asked for a private room on the second floor by the window. It was convenient for them to observe the situation outside. They chose the place that Gu Huai's group had to pass through after entering the capital. Shen Yu poured tea for himself and pushed a cup in front of Shang Junlin. "The tea here is pretty good. Your Majesty, try it." This tea house was recommended by Jiang Huiqing when he wrote to him. What had Gu Huai encountered before he met him? Shen Yu's gaze fell on Gu Huai for a long time. Shang Junlin discontentedly pinched his chin and saw the sadness in his eyes. "What is you thinking about?" Shang Junlin uncontrollably increased the strength of his fingers. His voice had a hint of hostility that his master hadn't noticed. Shen Yu pulled back from the memory of his previous life. He felt some pain in his chin. "Your Majesty, you're hurting me." Shang Junlin released Shen Yu's chin as if he had just woken up from a dream. Unsurprisingly, there were 2 shocking red marks on Shen Yu's chin. "Does it hurt?" The hostility in his heart instantly dissipated. Shang Junlin carefully lifted Shen Yu's chin and touched it with his fingertips. Shen Yu shook his head. Out of the corner of his eyes, he caught a glimpse of the King of Yu who was locked in the prisoner carriage. "This time, Your Majesty wants to punish the King of Yu. No one will jump out and say that it was the order of the late emperor, right?" As if he felt something, the person in the prisoner carriage looked up and glanced over. Then, as if he was stabbed, he hurriedly looked away. The King of Yu's rebellion is already set in stone. They don't dare. Seeing the scene he wanted to see, Shen Yu was satisfied. Now that the King of Yu was arrested, Shang Junlin still had a lot of things to do. After packing some snacks, the 2 got up and returned to the palace. Habit was really a scary thing. Shen Yu used more than 10 years to get used to being alone. But now, he only used a year to get used to the existence of another person by his side. After accompanying Shen Yu in Yuzhang Palace for a while, Shang Junlin went to see Gu Huai and the others. After a simple wash, Gu Huai needed to enter the palace to meet the emperor. Along with him, there were several other generals who came to the capital with him. Some of them were brought back from Subei, some were recruited halfway, and some were sent to Hangzhou. The King of Yu and his accomplices were locked up in the Ministry of Justice's prison. The King of Yu had already rebelled. Even with the late emperor's order, no one in the imperial court dared to plead for the King of Yu this time. It was a serious crime of rebellion. Even if they had several lives, it wouldn't be enough to pay for it. No one would joke about the fate of themselves and their family. A serious crime of rebellion would go down in infamy for thousands of years. The palace held a small welcoming banquet for Gu Huai and the others. The important officials of the imperial court also attended. During the banquet, Shang Junlin rewarded the people who had made contributions this time. Gu Huai was promoted to a second-grade general, which was even higher than his original position. This time, no one raised any objections. I order you to arrest the remnants of the rebels as soon as possible. At the same time, Shang Junlin gave out a new mission. This subject obeys. After receiving the decree, Gu Huai returned to his seat. During this time, many officials came to curry favor with him. They could already see the future of this newly promoted general from Shang Junlin's attitude. To be able to be placed in an important position by the emperor, he would definitely have a bright future. Moreover, Gu Huai didn't belong to any power in the imperial court. At this time, it was better to befriend him and pull him to their side. After the banquet ended, Shang Junlin didn't return to Yuzhang Palace immediately. Instead, he went to the imperial study. The leader of the hidden dragon guards silently appeared in the imperial study. We need to know everything about Gu Huai, no matter how big or small. He couldn't ignore Shen Yu's gaze during the day. Shang Junlin sat beside the bed and stroked Shen Yu's hair from time to time. His face was not very good. No need to salute. Just feel His Highness's pulse. A white hand stretched out from the bed curtain. The white skin was covered with red marks. Imperial physician Gu only glanced at it and then looked away to focus on feeling His Highness's pulse. Your Highness has some symptoms of a cold. I will prescribe a medicine. After taking it, Your Highness will recover in 2 to 3 days. Imperial physician Gu wrote down the prescription and a palace servant immediately took it to get the medicine. Shang Junlin carefully put Shen Yu's arm back under the quilt. Is Your Highness's body seriously injured? How did he catch a cold? Rest assured, Your Highness. Your Highness's body is fine. The cold may be because he caught a cold. It's nothing serious. As for why he caught a cold, Imperial physician Gu did not dare to guess. Thinking of what happened last night, Shang Junlin was annoyed. After he got up, he checked Shen Yu's temperature. After confirming that he was fine, he left. After a while, he came back and found that Shen Yu had a fever. When Imperial physician Gu recalled the red marks he had seen in a hurry, he couldn't help but say, Your Majesty, His Majesty's body can't withstand the torment. The fever this time is partly because he caught a cold, and another reason is, he did not continue and paused for a moment. If Your Highness is considerate of Your Highness's health, please restrain yourself a little. Shang Junlin's face became more and more ugly. The palace servants could not help but tremble. They did not dare to breathe loudly. Imperial physician Gu knew that his words would anger the emperor, but it was the truth. He had to say it. In the silence where a pin drop could be heard, the chuckle from the bed curtain was unusually obvious. It instantly broke the suffocating atmosphere. In his sleep, Shen Yu vaguely heard Shang Junlin's voice. He woke up little by little and happened to hear Imperial physician Gu's words. He could not help but laugh. Shang Junlin did not have time to be angry with Imperial physician Gu. He quickly leaned over and asked, You is awake. Are you feeling unwell? I'm a little thirsty. Shen Yu's voice was a little hoarse. Mu Shi, who was serving at the side, quickly came over with warm water. Shang Junlin helped Shen Yu up and let him lean on his body. He held the cup with one hand and put it next to Shen Yu's mouth. Shen Yu's body was sore and weak. He did not want to raise his hand. He drank the water in the cup with Shang Junlin's hand. His throat finally felt more comfortable. When the bed curtain was pulled open, he saw Imperial physician Gu standing at the side. He belatedly realized that his body temperature was too high. No wonder he felt unwell. It turned out that he was sick. Imperial physician Gu had already done what he needed to do. He did not stay to disturb the two of them. He took the medicine box and left. Shen Yu was lying in Shang Junlin's arms. His body was covered with a thick quilt. His face was abnormally red and his breath was hotter than usual. Did your majesty hear what Imperial Physician Gu said just now? Shen Yu joked, in the future, your majesty should restrain yourself more. It's my fault. Shang Junlin's tone was a little gloomy. I shouldn't have disturbed you last night. If it were not for him, Shen Yu would not have to suffer like this. What happened to your majesty yesterday? Shen Yu did not forget that when Shang Junlin hugged him, he repeatedly emphasized in his ear that he could only be his. He also forced him to respond again and again, cough. Shen Yu touched his burning ears. This time, it was not caused by a fever. Shang Junlin was immersed in deep self-blame and did not hear Shen Yu's words. Shen Yu waited for a long time. When he did not receive an answer, he looked up at Shang Junlin. Shen Yu was stunned when he saw the man's guilt-filled eyes. He pursed his lips. He pursed his lips. He knew his own body very well. If he hadn't taken good care of himself in the Imperial Palace, it wouldn't have been strange for him to get sick every few days. Shang Junlin had protected him too well. In the past year or so, other than a few accidents, he had almost never gotten sick. Normal people often caught colds, so he couldn't blame Shang Junlin for his illness this time. His hand was tightly held by the man under the quilt. Shen Yu tilted his head and rubbed his cheek against Shang Junlin. Your Majesty, what are you thinking about? You didn't even hear what I said. The warm and tender touch pulled Shang Junlin out of his guilty mood. He was about to say something when Shen Yu stopped him with his lips. Your Majesty, don't say anything I don't want to hear. Shen Yu's body temperature was much higher than usual. Under the touch of her soft lips, Shang Junlin forgot what he wanted to say. When Shen Yu retreated, he could not help but want to chase after her. Shen Yu could not avoid it, nor did he want to. His long eyelashes fluttered like butterfly wings, and he slowly closed his eyes. It was a kiss full of tenderness. After it was over, Shen Yu leaned on Shang Junlin's body and his breathing became heavier. Shang Junlin touched his forehead. You're sick, but you still teased me. Shen Yu snuggled into a comfortable position in his arms. Her Majesty hasn't said what happened yesterday. Although Shang Junlin liked to do that kind of thing, he would not completely ignore Shen Yu's feelings. Last night, Shang Junlin was very different from before. If he was not provoked, Shen Yu did not think that he would do such a thing. Shang Junlin's hands paused for a moment. Yesterday, you stared at Gu Huai for a long time. What were you thinking at that time? Shen Yu remembered that when he and Shang Junlin were in the tea house, he saw Gu Huai in full armor and thought of the Gu Huai he knew in his previous life. He could not help but feel a little emotional. Your Majesty, what do you think I was thinking? Shen Yu turned over and looked into Shang Junlin's eyes, face to face. Shen Yu's gaze was as usual. Shang Junlin liked his eyes very much, especially when he saw his own reflection in them. Shang Junlin moved his hand down and covered Shen Yu's eyes. Such clear eyes reflected his own unbearable feelings. You can't think about anything. Shang Junlin's voice was slightly hoarse. Your Majesty, what are you worried about? Shen Yu roughly understood that Shang Junlin was jealous. Shen Yu was used to Shang Junlin's jealousy, but he did not know why the after-effects were so strong this time. He even made a fuss in the middle of the night. Your Majesty, you don't have to worry about anything. I can guarantee that what your Majesty is afraid of will not happen. Other than your Majesty, there is no other person in my heart. Shen Yu's voice was not loud, but it was powerful. Shang Junlin knew that he should trust Shen Yu, but he could not help it. Would you, who was so good, not be willing to stay for him one day? I know that I will never allow anyone to take my place. Shang Junlin moved his finger down and lifted Shen Yu's chin. A you can only belong to me forever. So, last night, your majesty thought that I would fall in love with Gu Huai. Shang Junlin did not deny it. A you has always been very concerned about him. If that's the case, I also care about Prince Yu, Jiang Huiqing, Shen Qingran. Does that mean your majesty thinks that I will fall in love with them? Shang Junlin pursed his lips and did not say a word. Shen Yu narrowed her eyes and suddenly leaned forward to bite Shang Junlin's face. Your majesty, even if you don't believe me, you should believe in yourself. In this world, who can compare to your majesty? Why would I give up such a good majesty and choose someone who is not as good as you? I am not as good as a you says. I have a lot of unbearable things, Shen Yu bit him again. I won't allow anyone to belittle the person I like, even if that person is your majesty. Shen Yu bit down hard. After her lips left, she left a bite mark on the man's face. Looking at her masterpiece, Shen Yu was in a good mood. The pain on his face was almost negligible, but the soreness in his heart could not be ignored. Shang Junlin hugged the person in his arms tightly. The joy in his heart seemed to be about to fly out. Shen Yu closed his eyes and allowed Shang Junlin to peck his face like a puppy. He liked the feeling of being needed by Shang Junlin. It made him feel that he was truly living in this world. Shen Yu struggled to reach out from under the quilt and hugged Shang Junlin back. Since this matter was resolved, it was time to settle another matter. Shouldn't your majesty give me an explanation for what happened last night? Shen Yu could clearly feel that Shang Junlin's body stiffened. Now that the king of Yu was captured, they were very worried about whether they would be implicated. Shang Junlin had always wanted to take action against the vassals and take back their excessive control over their fiefs. Now was not a good time. Shen Yu and Shang Junlin went to see the congratulatory gifts sent by the vassals. These things were first sent to a small village outside the palace. Then, the hidden dragon guards secretly transported them to the imperial palace and put them in Yuzhang Palace. Vermilion boxes were neatly placed in the courtyard. Little eunuch Meng was taking people to register. When he saw them, he put down what he was doing and came over to salute. Eunuch Meng Jr. was Eunuch Meng's godson. Back then, Shen Yu had deliberately selected him because he saw that Eunuch Meng was reliable in handling matters. The facts proved that this was indeed the case. Since Yuzhang Palace was handed over to him to manage, Shen Yu did not need to worry too much. You don't need to be so polite. Is everything here? Shen Yu looked at the boxes in the courtyard that were almost full and asked. A part of it has been put in the warehouse. This is not finished yet. Little eunuch Meng called a little eunuch, took the register from his hand, and presented it to Shen Yu. Gui Jun, please take a look. Shen Yu took it. You go ahead. His Majesty and I will take a look. Little eunuch Meng knew that the two of them didn't like to be disturbed when they were together. So, he took the palace servants and retreated to the side to continue the unfinished business. Shen Yu opened the register and took a look. They are willing to spend money. All the things sent were exquisite and priceless. Shang Junlin casually opened the box beside his leg, and dazzling gems came into view. Shen Yu picked up one of the red gems and played with it in his hand. It seems that the supplies to aid Subei are not worth mentioning to them. Shang Junlin's gaze fell on Shen Yu's hand. Shen Yu's hand was white and slender. There was no imperfection in it. At this moment, when he held the blood-red gem, it made his skin look even whiter and more lustrous. It was more eye-catching than the gem. Shang Junlin's eyes darkened. Because he made Shen Yu unhappy last time, he hadn't been close to Shen Yu for a long time. If he didn't try his best, he might not be able to enter Shen Yu's bedroom. It was useless to enter. Shen Yu said that he didn't want him to sleep on the bed. Shang Junlin had to order the palace servants to put a small couch next to him. He slept on the couch at night. After playing with the gem for a while, Shen Yu put it back uninterestedly. The taxes from the feudal lords' fiefdoms are directly given to them. There are also the subsidies from the imperial court and the filial piety from the subordinates. It's normal to be able to give so many good things. I know. Shang Junlin opened the other boxes. Each box was priceless. The imperial court spends a lot of money every year to feed these people's ambitions. Now, these things are back in His Majesty's hands, aren't they? Shen Yu walked over and held Shang Junlin's hand. Ayu is right. Do you like these things, Ayu? Of course I like them. Shen Yu curved his eyes. I have already sent half of them to His Majesty's private warehouse. If you like them, you can keep them with you. Shang Junlin rubbed Shen Yu's fingers. Shen Yu shook his head. Liking them is one thing. I can't use so many of them. Giving half of them to His Majesty is my goodwill. His Majesty has given me so much. I also want to do something for His Majesty. Just like he knew that Shang Junlin wouldn't lack these treasures, he would give them to him if he wanted to. I heard that His Majesty dismissed Duke Shenbei. This news was heard from Mu Shi. Shang Junlin heard Duke Shenbei's words that day. Shen Yu knew that Shang Junlin would definitely do something, but he didn't expect that he would directly dismiss him. He sowed discord between Yu and His Majesty. He deserved it. Shang Junlin admitted frankly. Shen Yu suddenly approached Shang Junlin and looked up into his eyes. Why didn't His Majesty tell me? Are you afraid that I'll be angry? Shang Junlin stared at him for a while and slightly raised the corner of his mouth. Will you be angry? What do you think, Your Majesty? No matter what, Duke Shenbei is still my father. His Majesty dismissed him without a word. Shang Junlin raised his hand and touched Shen Yu's face. You doesn't seem to be angry now. Indeed, Your Majesty punished him well. Although he is my biological father, so what? If it weren't for the fact that the blood relationship can't be broken, I would have directly given up half of my bloodline. Shang Junlin sighed and hugged Shen Yu. From now on, I will always be here. Shen Yu's eyes were full of smiles. He raised his hand and hugged Shang Junlin's waist. Your Majesty, don't forget these promises. I won't forget. Never. This new year, Duke Shenbei's life was very difficult. First, he was fined his salary because he favored the concubine's son. Then, he was dismissed because of improper behavior. While others were happily preparing for the new year, Duke Shenbei's residence was gloomy. Shang Junlin's official position was taken away. In the imperial court, he clearly showed his dislike for Duke Shenbei. Many officials who had a good relationship with Duke Shenbei because of Shen Yu began to distance themselves from him. What was the most taboo for an official? The one who was in a higher position didn't like it. These people chose to be friends with Duke Shenbei because the emperor favored His Majesty. They tried to get some benefits for themselves. Now that Duke Shenbei was disliked by the emperor, they naturally chose to distance themselves. From being crowded to being completely deserted, it only took a few words. Duke Shenbei was ordered to reflect at home. He was not reconciled with the current result. He tried his best to see Shen Yu. Since the matter was caused by Shen Yu, it should be solved by Shen Yu. Shen Qingran's marriage was also cancelled. Those people were willing to agree with Duke Shenbei because of the benefits behind him. Now that Duke Shenbei had lost his official position and was disliked by the emperor and His Majesty, how could they not see the situation clearly before continuing the marriage? Duke Shenbei's marriage was cancelled one after another. Although it was a euphemistic attitude, he was still very angry. He knew what these people were thinking. They just felt that he had lost his power, so this deal was not worthwhile. After all, at the beginning, They agreed to let their daughter's child be adopted by His Majesty. They thought that Duke Shinbei's proposal was approved by His Majesty. Who knew that His Majesty didn't agree at all? Since His Majesty didn't agree, it was useless for them to think about it. Shen Qingran learned about this from the servant and laughed sarcastically. Shen Yu obviously had a grudge against Duke Shinbei's mansion. Duke Shinbei wanted to tie the two sides together through a child. It was really whimsical. How could Shen Yu be so easy to manipulate? These marriages were cancelled. Shen Yu finished drawing a red plum and put down the brush. Yes, I ordered people to pass the message to these people according to young master's instructions. They chose not to get involved in this muddy water. After knowing that Duke Shinbei had been dismissed from his position, Shen Yu sent people to visit the mansions of those who wanted to marry into Duke Shinbei's mansion. After all, these women were stirred up because of him. Shen Yu couldn't leave them alone. He had done what he should do and reminded them. If there were still people who chose to continue in the end, it was their own choice. Shen Yu wouldn't ask more. How is the situation in Duke Shinbei's mansion? It's very peaceful. Duke Shinbei is discussing matters with his confidants every day and doesn't go out. Second young master also restrained his temper and has been very low-key recently. Does Shen Qingran know about the arrest of Prince Yu? This. I don't know. Send people to find out. If he doesn't know, tell him the news. Shen Yu wanted to know. In this life, Prince Yu had fallen to this point. Would there be any friction between the two like in his previous life? Yes. Although she didn't understand why Shen Yu had to let Shen Qingran know about this matter, Mushi still did as she was told. Where is His Majesty now? During this time, Shang Junlin was very busy. Shen Yu sometimes couldn't see him for the whole day. When he went to bed at night, Shang Junlin might not come back. When he woke up in the morning, Shang Junlin had already gone to court. He should be discussing matters in the imperial study. Shen Yu looked at the sky. It was almost time for dinner. He asked the small kitchen to make some food and took Mu Shi to the imperial study. A few days ago, Eunuch Meng secretly complained to him that His Majesty was so busy that he even forgot to eat lunch and dinner. Eunuch Meng was guarding the door of the imperial study. He saw Shen Yu at a glance and hurriedly greeted him. Why are you here? I'm here to deliver dinner to His Majesty. Shen Yu walked into the imperial study. No one dared to stop him. Shang Junlin once said that Shen Yu could enter and leave any place in the palace at will. Shang Junlin was reviewing memorials. When he heard footsteps, he looked up. You. Chapter 183. Shen Yu looked around. There were no ministers in the imperial study, only Shang Junlin was there. What is you looking at? Shang Junlin asked when he noticed Shen Yu's movements. Why is Your Majesty busy here alone? You didn't even prepare dinner. Shen Yu walked over and asked the palace servants to put the food on the small table. How did you know that I didn't prepare dinner? Did Meng Chong talk too much? Shang Junlin stood up and held Shen Yu's hand to sit beside him. Your Majesty, please don't blame Eunuch Meng. He was just worried about your health. No matter how busy Your Majesty is, you still need to eat. Eunuch Meng stepped forward, opened the food box, and took out the dishes inside. Even if Your Majesty punishes this slave will still tell Guijun. With you supporting you, you naturally dare to say anything. Shang Junlin was not really angry. The aroma of the food filled the air. Shen Yu put away the booklet in front of Shang Junlin. Your Majesty, please eat first. I'm hungry. No one can starve you. Shang Junlin held Shen Yu's hand and stood up. Eunuch Meng quickly ordered the palace servants to clean up the place for the meal. The fire in the imperial study was not as strong as that in Yuzhang Palace. Shen Yu stayed for a while and barely warmed himself up. Shang Junlin held his slightly cold hand and ordered Meng Qiang to heat up the fire. The dishes were laid out one by one. There were meat and vegetables. The aroma wafted through the air, making people hungry. I specially asked the kitchen to boil some soup. Your Majesty, please have some. Shen Yu scooped a bowl of milky white soup and put it in front of Shang Junlin. Shang Junlin certainly would not refuse his kindness. After drinking the bowl of hot soup, his body warmed up from the inside out. Shang Junlin ate very quickly. Even though he was taking care of Shen Yu while eating, he still put down his bowl before Shen Yu. Shen Yu always liked to eat slowly. Seeing that the man finished eating, she was not in a hurry. Instead of approving the booklet, Shang Junlin waited until Shen Yu finished eating before leading him to sit in front of the imperial table. Your Majesty, are you still busy with the matter of King Yu? Shen Yu glanced at the contents of the memorial. It was written by Sun Zhao, and it talked about the situation in Yuezhou. When the king of Yu raised his army, Yuezhou was in chaos for a while. Fortunately, Sun Zhao and his men arrived in time and suppressed the chaos in the shortest amount of time. King Yu had been in Yuezhou for many years and was deeply involved with the various forces of Yuezhou. Many of them were already following King Yu in secret. If they wanted to take back Yuezhou peacefully, they had to get rid of these forces first. This was Sun Zhao's main task. Things were progressing smoothly. The only thing that concerned people was that part of the King of Yu's forces disappeared from Yuezhou. These people should have been taken out of Yuezhou and met up with the King of Yu. Shen Yu put her finger on the edge of the memorial and said calmly. Shang Junlin, yes, I asked Gu Huai to investigate. The team they took care of on the way came from Yuezhou. Other than that, there were a few other forces whose whereabouts were unknown. Gu Huai received a new task. He did not even celebrate the new year before he led his troops out of the capital. He needed to get rid of the remaining forces according to the results of the interrogation of the arrested people. Shen Yu, Your Majesty, now that you have arrested the people, who was the one behind the King of Yu all these years? That Mr. Tan was also following orders, right? After the King of Yu was arrested, Shen Yu learned from Shang Junlin about what happened to the King of Yu these days. No matter how he looked at it, that Mr. Tan did not seem to be the one who made the decision. Shang Junlin, yes, the Ministry of Justice has been interrogating him these days. Mr. Tan knows a lot of information. According to the results of the interrogation, many of their people were arrested. However, they have not found out who the mastermind is. Shen Yu, is it because they can't find out, or, Shang Junlin rubbed the space between his eyebrows, it's because they can't find out the real identity of the mastermind. That person has never appeared in front of them. He gave them orders through the messengers. Those messengers are dressed in black and wear masks on their faces. They can't see their faces clearly. Shen Yu, this person hides very deeply and is very vigilant. There are so many people, but none of them have seen him before. Shang Junlin, yes. Shen Yu, he doesn't show his true identity, but people are willing to work for him. I'm getting more and more curious about this person's identity. How do they usually address him? Shang Junlin, they call him His Excellency. Shen Yu, to be able to gain the trust of the late emperor and hand over such a large force to him, he must at least be someone who was very active in the imperial court during the late emperor's time. He doesn't know much about the current imperial court. Your Majesty, have you checked the ministers who were more important during the late emperor's reign? Shang Junlin, I have. There is one who fits the description, but he passed away 10 years ago. The trail was cut short. They still had too little information at the moment. Shen Yu didn't know about the existence of this force in his previous life, let alone know who was behind this force. Shen Yu could only give up for the time being. Gu Huai's ability to take action was very strong. He led his soldiers and walked around Dahuan like ghosts, uprooting the forces lurking in the dark. The evidence of the King of Yu's rebellion was conclusive. He should be sentenced to death immediately. Considering that it was almost the new year, Shang Junlin moved the execution time back a little. The Ministry of Justice's prison was different from the dark prison. There were all kinds of criminals in it. The King of Yu was locked up alone in one place and was interrogated every day. His title was taken away, his surname was taken away, and his name was removed from the imperial family. Now, he was no longer a noble prince, but a lowly sinner. Shang Junlin wanted to get some information from him. The interrogators knew that the King of Yu would never rise again, so they didn't hold back. In just a few days, the King of Yu was tortured beyond recognition. The man covered in blood curled up by the wall. Whenever there was a sound, he couldn't help but shrink inwards. His eyes were cloudy and his expression was timid. He didn't look like the King of Yu of the past at all. Every part of his body was in pain. Those were the wounds left by the torture. The executioners only needed to ensure that he didn't die. They couldn't be bothered to care about wounds that weren't fatal. The wounds were inflamed and festered. If it wasn't for the fact that it was winter, it would have been even more serious. The moonlight seeped in from the window above. The King of Yu raised his head and looked at the moonlight in a daze. It was cold and charming. He reached out his trembling hands to grab the moonlight, but he only grabbed air. The moon hung high in the sky. It was impossible for him to grab it. The King of Yu covered his face. His hoarse laughter overflowed through his fingers. After an unknown period of time, the embarrassed man leaning against the wall stopped moving. "Your Majesty, the coronation ceremony is coming soon. Can you see if there are any changes in the process?" An unfamiliar voice awakened the King of Yu's consciousness. He opened his eyes and found himself standing in a magnificent imperial palace. Countless people surrounded him, calling out, "Your Majesty." In their hands, they held clothes and accessories that only an emperor was fit to wear. He opened his arms. The palace servants carefully put on the black robe that symbolized the emperor's identity. Red candles were lit in the hall. It was gray outside the hall. It was suffocating. "Your Majesty, young Master Shen is here." Young Master Shen. Who was it? There was no need for him to ask. A thin young man in a light blue gown walked in slowly. "Congratulations, Your Majesty. You got what you wanted." The King of Yu opened his eyes wide. He saw the appearance of the person who came. It was Shen Yu, but he was different from the Shen Yu in his impression. The Shen Yu standing in front of him was older than he remembered. His facial features were fully developed. There was an indescribable temperament between his eyebrows, which made him more attractive. He called him Your Majesty. Was he calling him? The auspicious time has arrived. Your Majesty should ascend the throne. Chapter 184. "You are wrong." Shang Junlin looked at him condescendingly as if he was looking at an ant. "A Yu is a person, not an object that can be measured. I respect his every choice." But he would never let go. The laughter stopped abruptly. King Yu stared at Shang Junlin. "Do you believe these words yourself? You summoned the Shen family into the palace, isn't it because of the fate they bear?" Shang Junlin suddenly reached out and grabbed King Yu's neck, lifting him up. "Don't think that everyone is as dirty as you. You believe in these things, but it doesn't mean that I also believe in them. If I really believed in fate, how could I sit in this position?" Cough, cough. Because he was suffocating, King Yu's face was abnormally red. Other than coughing, he couldn't say a word. Shang Junlin frowned and released his hand. King Yu fell to the ground, clutching his neck and coughing violently. Eunuch Meng carefully handed over the handkerchief. Shang Junlin wiped his 5 fingers one by one, as if he was wiping away the contaminants. You called me here just to tell me this. I met Xinyu outside the palace. If I didn't get close to Shen Qingran and touch his bottom line, do you think he would choose to enter the palace in a fit of pique? If he really doesn't care about me at all, why would he act in a fit of pique? He even gave up his bright future to enter the palace. Every word of King Yu was like a thorn in Shang Junlin's heart. The man's eyes deepened, rolling with unfathomable emotions. Eunuch Meng was close and could clearly feel the oppressive aura coming from the man's body. He couldn't help but secretly sweat. Would Prince Yu's words have a bad influence on His Majesty? Eunuch Meng knew better than anyone else how much Shang Junlin cared about Xinyu. The more you cared about someone, the more you couldn't tolerate a little betrayal, especially when Shang Junlin was the emperor. If he really thought that Xinyu had old feelings for King Yu, Eunuch Meng didn't dare to think about the consequences. Before leaving, Shang Junlin instructed the prison guards to entertain the Prince of Yu. Eunuch Meng followed behind him, trembling with fear. He could feel that His Majesty was in a bad mood. No matter what he said, it was impossible for him to not hold any grudges in his heart. Just as Eunuch Meng was about to say a few words of advice, he heard Shang Junlin say in a very low voice, "If we kill the King of Yu, will you be unhappy?" Eunuch Meng was stunned. He swallowed the words he was about to say. Things seemed to be a little different from what he had expected. Shang Junlin only said this one sentence. He didn't expect anyone to answer him. On the way back to the palace, he remained silent. No one knew what he was thinking. Suddenly, Shang Junlin said, "Let's go to the secret prison." Eunuch Meng did not dare to disobey and hurriedly ordered the carriage to turn around. When they arrived at the secret prison, Eunuch Meng subconsciously followed them but was stopped by Shang Junlin. "You stay here. I will go in alone." Eunuch Meng didn't know why Shang Junlin wanted to go to the secret prison at this time, but he couldn't disobey Shang Junlin's orders. He could only stand outside and wait. Shang Junlin's state was obviously not right. He was worried that something had happened and anxiously paced back and forth. After some time, Shang Junlin came out with a cold aura. Eunuch Meng greeted him. "Your Majesty. Return to the palace." This sentence seemed to have exhausted all the man's strength. On the way back to the palace, there was silence. Eunuch Meng didn't know what happened to Shang Junlin in the secret prison. He only felt that Shang Junlin's aura was even colder when he came out of the secret prison. The moon was dark and the wind was strong. The night sky was dotted with stars. The cold wind was bone-chilling and penetrated into the marrow. Yuzhang Palace was brightly lit and lively. Shen Yu sat on the soft couch and watched Mu Shi instruct the young eunuchs to paste the written couplets and the word fortune. The clever palace maids cut many window flowers and pasted them on the window. Out of the corner of his eyes, Shen Yu glanced at the person outside the room. He stood up and walked out. "Your Majesty, why don't you come in?" The person standing outside was Shang Junlin. Shang Junlin was still wearing a black robe. Shen Yu rarely saw him wearing other colors. When he got closer, he could feel the coldness from the man. Shen Yu reached out and held Shang Junlin's hand that was hanging by his side. He was slightly surprised. The man's hand was very cold. In Shen Yu's memory, Shang Junlin's hand had always been warm. When the weather was cold, he would wrap his hand in his palm and slowly warm it. "Your Majesty, how long have you been standing outside? Your hand is cold. Come in and warm it up." Shen Yu pulled Shang Junlin's hand and walked into the room. The man stood in the shadows. Shen Yu couldn't see the expression on his face. He only felt that Shang Junlin was unusually quiet today. Shang Junlin followed Shinyu into the room. Shinyu pushed Shang Junlin to sit on the soft couch. He ordered Mu Shi to bring hot tea to the man's mouth. "Your Majesty, drink some to warm your body." Shang Junlin stared at Shinyu without blinking. Shinyu moved the cup in his hand forward. His long eyelashes drooped. The man drank the water in the cup with Shinyu's hand. Shinyu took the empty cup and turned around. He wanted to put the cup on a small table. Before he leaned over, he found that his sleeve was pulled. He turned around and saw Shang Junlin holding his sleeve with one hand and speaking for the first time today. "Don't go." Shinyu looked at the distance between himself and the man who was stubbornly holding his sleeve. He sat back helplessly. Mu Shi came over and took the cup in Shinyu's hand. Shinyu finally realized that something was wrong with Shang Junlin. Shinyu reached out and held Shang Junlin's face. "Your Majesty, what happened? Why do you look so distracted?" He knew that Shang Junlin was very busy recently. But no matter how busy he was, he shouldn't be like today. He looked like he was in a daze. He stared at Shang Junlin's eyes. His figure was clearly reflected in the man's dark eyes. Suddenly, the man reached out and wrapped his arms around his waist, pressing him tightly into his arms. "I went to see Prince Yu today." "Why did your Majesty go to see him?" Seeing that Shinyu's tone was normal, Shang Junlin's heart calmed down a little. In a place where Shinyu couldn't see, his eyes showed a complicated expression. "He said something to me. He said that you chose to enter the palace because you were angry with him." When he said this, Shang Junlin didn't know what he was thinking. Maybe he was thinking about something, or maybe he wasn't thinking about anything. He originally wanted to hide this matter in his heart and never say it out loud. No matter why Shinyu entered the palace, it was fine as long as he had him in his heart. He didn't participate in Shinyu's previous life, and he didn't have the right to care about it. He thought that he could do it, but at this moment, he found that he couldn't. Whether it was before or after he met Shinyu, he couldn't ignore everything that happened to him. He longed for an answer, but he was also afraid of getting an answer. He told himself over and over again that he didn't have the time to participate in the past. He shouldn't take it to heart. But Prince Yu's words were like gangrene attached to the bone. The more he didn't want to care about it, the more it kept echoing in his mind. He asked himself, "Can I really not care about it?" The answer was no. He couldn't. He didn't blame Shinyu for anything. He only hated Prince Yu for deliberately getting close to Shinyu for a maxim. Shinyu felt a strong sense of uneasiness from Shang Junlin. He wanted to look up at him, but he was held tightly in his arms. He could only maintain this posture. After a deep sigh, Shinyu put his hands around the man's thin waist. "Your Majesty, why do you care about what Prince Yu said? He is now a prisoner. He knows that he can't change the situation. What he said is nothing more than to make your Majesty unhappy. When I entered the palace, I did have a little relationship with Prince Yu." Hiss, the man's arms suddenly tightened, and a pain came from his waist. Shinyu patted his back and comforted him. "Listen to me first." The man's arms loosened a little, but he still confined Shinyu, not giving him any chance to leave. Shinyu didn't care and continued, "Although it was related to Prince Yu, it was different from what he said. If I was angry, I had thousands of ways. Why did I choose to enter the palace, which was the most unpleasant way? I entered the palace for your Majesty. I heard a lot about your Majesty from others. In fact, I wanted to see what your Majesty was like. If I wasn't detained in the palace by Count Junbei, maybe I could have seen your Majesty long ago." Shinyu said half-jokingly, "If I saw your Majesty first, there would be no Prince Yu. Every part of your Majesty is in my heart." The heavy fog in Shang Junlin's heart dispersed with Shen Yu's words. He lowered his head and rubbed Shen Yu's face. As for Prince Yu, he was really annoying. He thought that I didn't know anything and pretended to appear in front of me. I only felt that it was fake and didn't want to see him act at all. Your Majesty should have investigated the matter between me and Prince Yu. When I was with him, I was always cold. After knowing his true identity, I thought that entering the palace was a good way to get rid of him. Shen Yu didn't lie. Before his rebirth, he didn't know the true identity of Prince Yu, but this matter couldn't be verified. After his rebirth, he didn't want to have any entanglement with Prince Yu, so he simply chose a path that was completely different from his previous life. Didn't Prince Yu like Shen Qingran? He would help them. Your Majesty, don't think too much because of Prince Yu's words. If your Majesty wants to know about me, you can ask me directly. The closer they got, the more Shen Yu felt Shang Junlin's uneasiness. He didn't know why Shang Junlin was uneasy, but he was willing to do his best to make him feel at ease. Shang Junlin quietly hugged the person in his arms. He wished that time could stop at this moment forever. You will stay by my side forever, right? As his voice fell, a kiss was printed on her forehead. If I don't stay by your Majesty's side, where else can I go? Shang Junlin's arms loosened a little. Shen Yu struggled to free himself from the man's arms. He hooked the man's neck and forced him to lower his head. He pressed his forehead against his. I have to clear my name. I really don't like Prince Yu. No matter in the past, present, or future, I only like your Majesty. After saying that, he kissed the lips that were inches away. There are some things that I won't do with him if I don't really like him. Maybe Prince Yu said something to your Majesty, but your Majesty, don't believe him. If it was only Prince Yu, Shang Junlin naturally wouldn't care as much as he did now. What really made him unable to let go was the words of the person he met in the secret prison. He said that Shen Yu was destined to be on Prince Yu's side. Her fate was set and couldn't be changed. Even if the process was different roads led to the same destination. At that moment, Shang Junlin's desire to kill Prince Yu reached its peak. Shen Yu's initiative dispelled the uneasiness in Shang Junlin's heart. He hugged Shen Yu, turned the tables, and fiercely kissed back. Chapter 185. This time, Shen Yu was unusually docile and proactive. Shang Junlin's movements were also very slow. Everything was so slow that it became a kind of torture. With every step, Shang Junlin would ask Shen Yu how she felt. At first, Shen Yu enjoyed it very much, but after a few times, she felt like she was about to collapse. Don't worry about me. Don't ask me. Do whatever you want. It was like a ferocious beast had opened its cage. A ferocious beast was still a ferocious beast. No matter how obedient she pretended to be, she couldn't change her nature. After everything was over, Shen Yu collapsed on the soft bed. She didn't want to move a single finger. She looked up at the man who was tidying up the soft bed. As expected, she saw satisfaction on the man's face. Shen Yu narrowed her eyes. She had an illusion that she had been cheated. She grabbed the man's lapel and pulled him over. What's wrong? Are you not feeling well? Shen Yu saw the nervousness in the man's eyes. She slowly let go of his hand. Forget it. She couldn't blame others for the choice she made. Shang Junlin called for hot water and carefully wiped Shen Yu clean. Then, he helped her change into clean clothes. The dirty clothes were taken away by the palace servants. The soft bed was also changed into clean bedding. After cleaning, Shen Yu was carried to the bed. Shang Junlin hugged her and asked softly, do you want to eat? Shen Yu silently calculated the time and said, no need. It was already past Shin Yu's usual bedtime. Shin Yu lay down for a while and found that she couldn't fall asleep. She turned her head and looked at Shang Junlin. Your Majesty also didn't sleep. Under the quilt, Shang Junlin's hand was around Shin Yu's waist. Shin Yu was used to sleeping in a man's arms. She was not used to sleeping alone. Last time, after Shang Junlin annoyed her, she was driven to sleep alone on a small bed for a few days. Later, because Shin Yu couldn't stand it anymore, the punishment ended early. I want to see more of you. Shang Junlin was not sleepy at all. What happened today was like a thorn in his heart that could not be removed or ignored. Shin Yu stretched out her hand from the quilt and covered the man's eyes. Sleep, what your Majesty is worried about will not happen. The next day, when Shin Yu woke up, Shang Junlin was still not there. Mu Shi combed his hair and tidied his clothes. Shin Yu looked at the clean and tidy soft bed and asked, "Do you know where His Majesty went yesterday?" This servant heard eunuch Meng mention that His Majesty went to see the king of Yu. On the way back, he also went to the secret prison. Dark prison. Wasn't Mr. Zhu, the one who had said, "If you obtain the Qin family, you obtain the world," locked up in a secret prison? Was Shang Junlin's abnormal behavior yesterday because of him? Shang Junlin's whereabouts would not be hidden from Shin Yu. If we can't take down the northern desert in one fell swoop, we might as well choose someone who is easier to control to become the king of the northern desert. Then we can plan slowly. It was certainly better to have a more peaceful way than a war that was a waste of manpower and money. Shin Yu turned around and put his hands behind his back. He leaned back slightly and looked straight into Shang Junlin's eyes. This is a very good opportunity. Now the northern desert is in a mess. There won't be a result in a short period of time. Your Majesty, why don't you wait a little longer? When they are almost exhausted, you can spread the news that you are willing to help them and enter the northern desert in the name of assistance. If the people who seek help are tactful, they can make a peace agreement first. If not, the Dahuan army has already entered the northern desert. It will be much easier to do something then. Shang Junlin put his hands behind Shin Yu's back and slowly approached him. The distance between them was getting closer and closer. They could hear each other's breathing. The tips of their noses touched. The man's voice was slightly hoarse. For a moment, I almost thought that Zhu Wang's words were true. Chapter 186. Why do you say so, Your Majesty? Shin Yu was puzzled. Shang Junlin said in a low and magnetic voice, "It's not because of some illusory fate. It's just because of a Yu. If you can get a Yu's help, you will be able to achieve twice the result with half the effort. I'm not as magical as Your Majesty says." Shin Yu smiled. Shang Junlin stood up straight and picked up Shin Yu. "A Yu, don't belittle yourself. Who do you think should be sent to the northern desert?" Since they were going to do something in the northern desert, the other party would definitely not act according to their plan. They had to send someone who could play a role to stir up disputes, lead disputes, and firmly control the leading power in their own hands. Shin Yu went through the information of the officials in the imperial court in his mind. After more than a year, his understanding of the imperial court had deepened. Because he occasionally helped Shang Junlin approve memorials, he knew a lot about the officials in the imperial court. "I think the person I choose may be a bit risky. Do you have a suitable person in mind, Your Majesty?" Shin Yu sat on a chair beside him. "Fang Jun is very suitable. But the matter in Subei is too well known in the northern desert. Now that he has entered the cabinet, it's not appropriate for him to do this kind of thing. It's better to choose someone who is not well known in the imperial court. It's easier to disguise." Shang Junlin also sat down. Shin Yu nodded. The more obscure the person was, the less likely it would arouse the vigilance of the northern desert. Xinyu, Your Majesty, what do you think of Jiang Huiqing? Shang Junlin, I just sent him to take over Lin Yuan. If he enters the northern desert, won't it arouse the suspicion of the northern desert people? Xinyu, of course not in the identity of Jiang Huiqing. Your Majesty, have you forgotten that he and He Qingyu went deep into the northern desert in disguise? Shang Junlin, you want Jiang Huiqing to go to the northern desert with a new identity? This matter seemed insignificant, but it had a huge impact. If they did it well, they would be able to make the greatest contribution in the shortest amount of time. If they didn't do it well, they might even lose their lives and implicate De Huan. Thus, they had to be very careful when choosing the people to carry out the mission. Lin Yuan has already been incorporated into the Great Huan Empire's territory. Your Majesty needs to send an official to take over as soon as possible. Your Majesty can first find someone to test if Jiang Huiqing is up to the task. Xinyu said this not because of his friendship with Jiang Huiqing. In his previous life, Jiang Huiqing worked under him, so he knew his ability. Although Jiang Huiqing in this life was younger than in his previous life, his intelligence was not inferior. There were 2 assistant officials accompanying him. After settling the matters in Lin Yuan, they could start rearing war horses. After settling these matters, there were less than 7 days left before the new year. Shang Junlin announced that he would stop writing and all the unimportant matters in the imperial court were suspended. The officials who had been busy for a year finally had a short break. During this time in the past, Shang Junlin did not need to deal with official matters. There was no one in the palace that he cared about, so he would stay outside the palace alone for a few days. After Xinyu entered the palace, for some reason, Shang Junlin did not leave Xinyu alone in the palace. Instead, Shang Junlin spent the entire new year with Xinyu. If this was the case in the first year, it would not change this year. After the morning assembly was no longer needed, Shang Junlin simply sent all the matters to Yuzhang Palace. If it was not for Xinyu's refusal, he would even choose to meet the officials in Yuzhang Palace. Even though there was no need to attend the morning assembly, De Huan was such a big country that it was impossible for Shang Junlin to just sit back and do nothing. Some of the important matters that required Shang Junlin's approval still had to be dealt with. As Shang Junlin spent more time in Yuzhang Palace, he spent more time with Xinyu. When Xinyu woke up in the morning, he was no longer the only one in bed. Sometimes, when it was late, Shang Junlin would hug Xinyu until he woke up. Sometimes, when Xinyu did not allow it, Shang Junlin would wake up early the next morning to practice his swordsmanship. This morning, Xinyu suddenly woke up. There was no familiar warmth beside him. He touched the bed and the place where he should have been lying was cold. His sleepiness was mostly gone. Xinyu propped himself up and sat up. His black hair fell over his shoulders. His inner clothes slid open with his movements, revealing his porcelain white skin. His snow-like skin was covered with red plum blossoms. The ancient seal had not disappeared, but new marks were added. A chill seeped into his collar. Xinyu gathered his clothes and called out, "Mu Shi." Hearing the commotion, Mu Shi hurried in. "Why are you awake so early today? Bring me my clothes. I can't sleep." "Where is His Majesty?" Mu Shi brought the clothes over and Xinyu put them on one by one. "His Majesty is practicing his swordsmanship in the courtyard. Do you want to take a look?" Xinyu's interest was piqued. He had been in the palace for so long. When he woke up in the morning, Shang Junlin was already busy for half a day. How could he have the chance to see him practice in the morning? Xinyu put on a fox fur cloak and went to the courtyard. It was snowing outside. Mu Shi wanted to hold an umbrella for Xinyu, but Xinyu refused. He took the umbrella and walked to the courtyard alone. In the middle of the courtyard, a man dressed in black was holding a long sword. As he moved, the sound of the sword rang out. Shin Yu held the umbrella and stood at a place where he could see clearly but would not disturb the man. He watched quietly. It was the first time he saw Shang Junlin in such a state. His hair was tied up high and the black cloak wrapped around the man's muscular body. His aura was sharp and his eyes were filled with determination. The man's movements were swift and fierce. His every move carried an irresistible momentum. In the vast expanse of white snow, only the man could catch Shin Yu's attention. Shin Yu did not disturb him. The man kept his sword and walked towards Shin Yu. "Why did you come out?" Shang Junlin walked to Shin Yu and helped him fix the collar of his fox fur cloak. Shin Yu stretched his arm forward and covered the top of the man's head. "I heard from Mu Shi that His Majesty is practicing his swordsmanship, so I came out to take a look." The hand holding the umbrella was exposed and was frozen red. Shang Junlin frowned and wanted to put the hand in his arms to warm it up. However, when he saw the snow on his body, he gave up the idea. He reached out and took Shin Yu's umbrella. "I'll hold it." Shin Yu's hand was a little frozen. When he heard this, he let go of his hand and hugged the hot water woman in his arms. Shang Junlin held the umbrella handle and firmly fixed the umbrella above their heads. "Isn't His Majesty cold?" Shin Yu looked at the man in thin clothes and asked. Shang Junlin shook his head. "I'm used to it. His Majesty is still the best. If it were me, I wouldn't be able to stand it." Shin Yu looked at Shang Junlin and then looked at himself, who was wrapped up like a ball. The two of them seemed to be in different seasons. Eunuch Meng brought the cloak over. Shang Junlin was holding the umbrella, so it was inconvenient for him to move. Shin Yu took the cloak and measured it on Shang Junlin's shoulder. Shang Junlin was too tall, so it was inconvenient for him to move. Shin Yu patted his shoulder. "His Majesty, squat down a little." Shang Junlin squatted down slightly. Shin Yu put the cloak on him and carefully tied the collar. "His Majesty, it's better for you to take a hot bath to prevent the cold from entering your body." Eunuch Meng received the order and hurriedly asked someone to prepare hot water. Shin Yu knew that Shang Junlin practiced swordsmanship every day. However, this was the first time he saw it with his own eyes. Eunuch Meng took the sword away. Shin Yu only glanced at it briefly. It was a long sword that was completely black. The blade was cold and the hilt was engraved with patterns. Unfortunately, it was too fast, so Shin Yu didn't see what was engraved. When the two of them arrived at the bedchamber, the hot water was already prepared. Shang Junlin had a lot of snow on his body. After entering the room, Shin Yu untied his cloak and took the umbrella from his hand. "His Majesty, go take a bath." Seeing that Shang Junlin was soaking in the hot water, Shin Yu asked Mu Shi to boil a bowl of ginger water. Shang Junlin changed into clean clothes and came out. Mu Shi also came in with the ginger water. "His Majesty, drink it quickly." "I don't need this." In the end, Shang Junlin couldn't resist Shin Yu and drank the entire bowl. "Your Majesty should also take care of your body. Otherwise, I will be worried." Shin Yu put the empty bowl aside and walked behind Shang Junlin to dry his hair. He rarely did this kind of thing, so it wasn't very smooth. After a long time, he finally dried Shang Junlin's hair until it was half dry. Shang Junlin grabbed Shin Yu's arm and pulled him into his arms. Why are you so virtuous today?" Shin Yu's long black hair slid down his shoulders and fell on Shin Yu's clothes. It then went down and intertwined with his hair. Shin Yu looked up at him. His eyes were shining. "His Majesty doesn't like it." "Of course, I like it." The distance between the two of them was getting closer and closer. Shin Yu slowly closed his eyes. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. Eunuch Meng's slightly anxious voice sounded from outside the door. Your Majesty, the Imperial Army found a large number of suspicious people outside the capital. The purpose of these people is unknown. Your Majesty, please make a decision.